This manga begins with the banishment of the Grand Magician Abel from the adventurer party led by his now former companion, Roy. The group's member declares the uselessness of the mage now that the Calamity Demon, the Demon Lord of Dusk, has been defeated, and reminds Abel that he, who has amber eyes, is not needed anymore in the new world of peace. However, the Grand Magician already knows the shocking and unfortunate truth that humans like him, who have the same amber eyes as their enemies, the demons, will get persecuted. Roy reveals the mansion he has prepared for Abel to still enjoy life, but the enraged Grand Magician can't bear his presence and declares he won't appear in front of them again, forcing Abel to leave Roy despite knowing that he, himself, and others are not the ones to blame. Frustrated, the Grand Magician heads into a cave and walks toward a coffin, opening it as he proceeds to his plan. When all he can see is darkness, Abel breaks the coffin's lid and wakes up from his deep slumber of 200 years. Finally, the Grand Magician, whose appearance turns younger, gets up from the reincarnation spell he cast on himself right after his banishment. Abel hopes that this future contains an improved civilization, where technology surpasses magic, and will come to accept the Amber Eyes, which his previous timeline cannot do. Therefore, the Grand Magician looks for a mirror that's nowhere to be seen anymore to view the demonic eyes in his new appearance, which he modified into perfection in the past. However, an emergency occurs as Abel senses the presence of someone infiltrating the room. Immediately, the magician prepares a surprise attack on the intruder, until the woman finally appears and recognizes the boy who she calls with great respect. Abel is taken aback when the stranger lets hold of her basket in shock, as she cries tears of joy after her most awaited awakening of the Grand Magician. Despite that, Abel still has no idea who the girl in front of him is, confident that he has no social relationship with women in his past life. However, the figure of the crying girl rings a bell to the Grand Magician, and he finally remembers who she is. Abel goes down memory lane when she defends a little girl from the punishment Roy and the party wants to bestow on her, the Demon King's daughter. Fortunately, the Grand Magician's success leads to the current situation as he reaches his hand to the demon girl and greets her, the woman named Lilith, for their long-awaited reunion. The two engage in a bit of banter where the demon lady reveals that she found Abel after 100 years of searching, but the Grand Magician is more interested in the woman's eyes, whose amber color mysteriously turned blue. Unsurprisingly, the boy from the past thinks that one cannot change the colors of their eyes until the demon lady, who lives until the present, shows the existence of the contact lens to the Grand Magician. Fascinated by the item, Abel sinisterly laughs and celebrates his right choice of a timeline to be reincarnated to, given that there are discriminations throughout the generations because of one's eye color. Suddenly, Lilith calls her savior and invites him to discuss things in her house as she suddenly puts a scarf on the magician who's willing to hear what she'll say. Afterward, the demon lady introduces the unfamiliar piece of cloth to the ignorant Abel and offers her hand to start their walk. Albeit reluctant, the now young boy holds Lilith's hand as they exit the cave and reach the snowy lands, leading the demon lady to urge her savior to continue their little journey. In spite of the embarrassment he feels, Abel steps foot on the white snow again ever since his reincarnation. Eventually, Lilith and the magician reach the village where the demon lady resides, and bring Abel to a mansion next to an extravagant house nearby. Lilith reminds the Grand Magician that her place can help him avoid unnecessary attention, and Abel also realizes that, as he enters the mansion, to his surprise, the lights turn on without any use of magic, leading the demon lady to inform her ignorant savior about the light bulbs, which can be turned on with a flip of a switch. Abel assumes that magic stones power the fantastic invention, and is not so surprised by it as he thinks that using magic is still more convenient to a mage like him. Amused by his thoughts, Lilith giggles, but that confuses Abel as he believes that such a simple luminescent spell is the most basic to use. As he wonders why people waste effort on unnecessary equipment, the reincarnated boy falls asleep on the couch. Slowly, Abel is becoming accustomed to his new life while studying about the new generation. However, the immense decrease in the human's magical level baffles the Grand Magician to a great degree, as he shows disappointment with the information the book teaches to the young people. Unfortunately, even realizing that transcribers make changes to the tomes for generations can't diminish the boy's disappointment until drowsiness befalls his young body. While eating, Abel informs Lilith of his 3 reasons for reincarnation into a child's body despite the disadvantages, revealing his aim to reach the academic, physical, and magical peaks he'll undergo from his teen to 30s. Immediately, Abel goes back to studying and finishes it when he stumbles upon a pack of meals with a letter from Lilith, informing him that she'll head to work. As he gobbles the food, the Grand Magician wonders what kind of work the demon lady has, but the drowsiness hinders those thoughts as the little boy goes to study again. Suddenly, an unknown boy knocks on the room's door, startling Abel as he is aware that the mysterious person isn't the demon lady who just headed out to work. The appearance of the intruder creates tension in the mansion, as the young boy next door named Ted happily greets Abel, who he thinks is Lilith's little brother. Despite knowing he's wrong, the Grand Magician focuses on Ted's identity and assumes he's a rich boy living in the enormous mansion. Immediately, the arrogant young boy declares that Abel will be his underling, so the reincarnated man is not interested in listening as he ignores Ted's pestering to be his subordinate. Irritated, Abel tells the spoiled kid that he doesn't want to get involved in his nonsense while slamming the book close and intimidating Ted by revealing his demonic amber eyes to the young boy. Ted trembles in shock at the impeccable plan of the Grand Magician to scare him, leading Abel to proceed further to assert his dominance. However, the giggle he hears confuses him, as Ted suddenly bursts into laughter and mocks the strange eyes he sees for the first time, throwing Abel into confusion regarding the boy's unexpected actions. Mysteriously, Ted's laughter doesn't seem to end, and the Grand Magician still can't pinpoint the reason why. Fortunately, another intruder arrives and stops the boy's disrespectful actions as he, Ted's brother named Bass, scolds the young boy for entering Lilith's house without permission. As a result, Ted points to what he calls the chicken eyes and continues to insult the reincarnated magician. Despite that, Abel knows that it is Bass who he should be careful of, assuming that his older brother will watch for his amber eyes. Finally, Bass confirms the pretense of Abel as Lilith's talented younger sibling and surprisingly expresses his disappointment to the man who was once known as the Grand Magician. Watching the two treating his eyes as a laughingstock, Abel comes to a realization about the new generation and asks the brothers if his amber eyes are useless according to the current standards. Bass and Ted are dumbfounded hearing that, and the younger boy bursts into laughter again while calling Abel with the wrong name, a BB. Displeasure can be seen in the Grand Magician's eyes, but he still listens to Ted informing him that his chicken-colored eyes are ordinary compared to those that match the colors of the magical elements. Immediately, Bass stops his younger brother from saying more mockeries, but Abel is aware that the same kind as him needs at least 10 years to master not just one, but every element. Eventually, the older brother asks the name of who he assumes to be Lilith's little brother, and apologizes to him for the rudeness his younger brother shows. Out of concern, Bass urges Ted to say sorry, saying that the commoner can still leave peacefully, despite being magicless. The Grand Magician is surprised that the respectful young man also treats him as a fool for having amber eyes. Unfortunately, Abel's displeasure can't stop the two from leaving with satisfied smiles while mocking the magicless commoner. Dumbfounded, the Grand Magician wonders about the intruder's rude actions toward the presumed house owner's little brother, but their reasons are unveiled when Abel grabs the book depicting the world's war history. The magician finds out that there has been no conflict between humans and demons for the past 100 years, resulting in humankind not having to fear the demon's eyes anymore. Moreover, people gain the ability to produce magic with little practice based on their eyes' colors, contrary to those with amber eyes, which are now seen with contempt. The reincarnated boy feels dissatisfied with the current state of things. However, he finally understands the reason why Lilith resorts to using eye contact. Time passes, and while Abel is reading a book, the demon lady finally returns in a maid outfit, revealing that she's working as a housemaid while presenting herself to the embarrassed boy who contemplates Lilith's beauty while blushing. Eventually, the maid prepares dinner, but Abel tells her to wait and tells the demon lady that he now knows why she hides her eye color, and that it's not a mere wish not to let anyone know she's a demon. Lilith reveals that her kind almost no longer exists, because after Abel, the leader of the heroes who defeated the Demon King, left, humans eradicated the remaining demons, bringing peace to humanity, which resulted in the disappearance of the fear amber eyes deliver. Lilith confirms her savior's assumptions so far as she prepares dinner. However, Abel is still concerned if Lilith harbors hatred for the humans who ended her race. While the maid is smiling, the former hero remembers eliminating the Demon King with his party members, while the little demon princess hides while watching them obliterate her father. Even so, Lilith has no reason to despise the man who saved and gave her a place to live for a week, and even taught her magic, the human rules, and other things. The woman's topic change troubles the Grand Magician, as he wonders what the cute little girl from the past experienced to change into who she is now. To his surprise, the demon princess expresses her gratitude to her savior with a bright smile, making the Grand Magician speechless as he hides his embarrassment by covering his face with a book. A few moments after, Lilith is enjoying a night bath with none other than the little boy who she forces to come along earlier. Eventually, the demon lady notices Abel's troubles and apologizes for not holding back the urge her love brings. Therefore, the reincarnated boy warns Lilith about what would happen if a woman and a man like himself join a bath together. Still, the demon princess simply smiles as she gets up and tells the man with a little boy's body that her warnings aren't persuasive. She then sits beside her savior while still in the bath, forcing Abel to realize the immense change in the body of who was once a little girl. Overflowing with happiness, Lilith hugs Abel to celebrate him treating her as a woman, but the hero escapes from the woman's embrace and warns her that he won't hold himself back no matter what area it is. The demon princess smiles after hearing that until the night goes deeper, and she's now in bed. As he gets up, Abel looks at the demon princess and remembers what happened earlier when he made love with the woman who likes him. The demon princess has a satisfied smile in the middle of her slumber when Abel covers her with a blanket, feeling pleased to have a sound sleep after their bonding. A few days have passed since the Grand Magician reincarnated in the current timeline, but his uneventful routine of eating and studying in a continuous cycle continues. Unfortunately, a troublesome existence arrives every afternoon just like today as Ted barges in the door once again to greet his buddy. Already, Abel is getting annoyed by the pestering of the young boy who wants a playmate, forcing him to delay his reading time to cast body-strengthening magic, surprising the young noble as he dashes toward the window. Ted immediately stops Abel from jumping from the second floor, but that Grand Magician ignores his warning and leaps from where he is to land straight at the next floor successfully. Surprised, the young noble can only gasp in awe while Abel declares his unwillingness to be bothered by him. However, the boy who is impressed by his movements is not letting himself be defeated, as he also casts body-strengthening magic on himself and jumps toward where Abel is. The former hero is slightly surprised that Ted can activate the spell, but the flow of magic he sees from the young noble is so imperfect that Ted trips in the air and falls down from the house's second floor. Fortunately, the rich kid lands safely in the bushes, and Abel comes to ask if he's okay. But the little noble yells in frustration after getting the short end of the stick by the magician's skills. Irritated, Ted tries to catch Abel, but all his attempts end in failure, and all he can do is throw a tantrum over his lack of ability. Despite the spoiled kid's annoyance, the Grand Magician gives him motivational advice to train for another 20 years to master the ability. Unfortunately, Ted becomes more enraged as he complains about Abel's superiority when it should have been him. As a result, the former hero permits the young boy to be his superior, but then reveals the condition of taking his muffler first. Ted becomes excited when he hears that and declares it will be a strong victory for him. Hence, Abel starts the countdown and dashes away to begin his practice to discover the current generation's magical capabilities. The chase goes on as Ted persistently runs to grab the commoner's muffler. However, the Grand Magician notices the young noble using little to no magic and is now relying on his stamina to continue. While Ted is struggling, the Great Magician remembers the harsh training he underwent as a kid that enabled him to stand on the top of even the hero of the wind, Roy, in his past life. Eventually, Abel sees Ted's strength on the verge of giving up, so he asks the young noble if he still plans to continue. To his surprise, the persistent kid commences a surprise attack, but Abel dodges it without any difficulties, forcing Ted to admit his defeat as he can no longer move and chase the hero. Abel is amazed after seeing the rich kid exceeding his expectations and continuing the chase for minutes when he suddenly catches sight of somebody inside the noble's house. Using magic, the magician peeks inside the window, where Lilith and Bass are having a conversation. Suddenly, Abel hears the maid rejecting the noble's proposal to have a romantic relationship with him. The reincarnated hero is not surprised by the turn of events, but Bass, on the other hand, feels frustrated as he desperately asks the beautiful maid the reason for her rejection. Without mercy, Lilith informs the young man that she already has someone in her heart, shocking the boy, who immediately asks if Abel is the man she loves. The demon princess confirms the noble's hunch and asks him to give up, but Bass takes it badly and insults the maid for having romantic feelings for her brother. Enraged, the young man walks away, but Abel has no plans to clear up the misunderstanding of him becoming Lilith's brother, and decides to pretend he doesn't see anything. He then sees Bass's little brother executing a surprise attack until he screams the move's name, enabling Abel to easily dodge the kick, which causes Ted to slide on the roof and complain to the magician for evading his attack. Unfortunately, the young boy's magic power really reaches its limit this time, but Abel simply leaves him, hoping that Ted will stop coming after that. When a few days later pass, the young noble is still up to the challenge as he continues getting the muffler from Abel, only to get smacked in the head by the Grand Magician, who advises him to stop announcing his surprise attack. Embarrassed, Ted declares that he's close to completing the challenge, but Abel doesn't think of that at all, and instead confirms if he really called him by his name earlier. The young noble, who doesn't call him a BB anymore, declares that he already remembers Abel's name as he will be his underling someday. Excited, Ted casts the body-strengthening magic that has improved these past few days and uses it to take the magician's muffler until Abel disappears out of thin air and appears behind the young noble to kick his feet. While Ted is sliding down the floor, the Grand Magician mocks his resolve and provokes him into giving up. Frustrated, the young noble gets up to try again, but an accident occurs as his foot slips, resulting in Ted falling from the roof. It is too late when Abel goes down and rushes to his aid as the injury has already been inflicted on the young man and breaks his leg. Despite that, the Grand Magician believes that his recovery magic should be enough to treat the fracture, but Bass's arrival interrupts Abel from healing the injury as the older brother wants to cure Ted himself. The former hero is surprised that Bass, who isn't even a gray-eyed magician specializing in support, can cast a healing spell. However, the potent magician notices something wrong and asks the noble what he's doing. Irritated, Bass informs him of the unsurprising fact that he's applying recovery magic and orders Abel to stop distracting him. Unfortunately, the older brother is just making things worse, and the magician is aware that Bass is doing the healing process all wrong and will eventually tire out Ted's nervous system instead. Suddenly, the little brother screams in pain, and all Bass can do is ask him to endure it. However, Ted can't keep it up anymore, and he loses consciousness. Immediately, Abel suggests bringing the little noble to the medical office, but Bass has other concerns as he glares at the former hero and mentions his sin of kicking Ted's leg before the accident. The Grand Magician is calm and informs the older brother that Ted manages to get up after that, but the young noble's rage increases as he calls out Abel for not calling his younger brother with great respect. Even so, the former hero is still calm and urges Bass to move to a quieter place now that a crowd is forming in the area. Despite that, the noble still can't let Abel's disrespect pass, leading him to threaten the commoner by teaching him a lesson as he unsheathes his weapon, points it to the Grand Magician, and challenges him to a duel. Bass's declaration of war creates a commotion and causes the bystander to gossip, causing Abel to refuse the noble's challenge. Unsurprisingly, that enrages Bass even more, and he's not letting the commoner end it with his reputation getting tarnished as he spouts his displeasure to the Grand Magician who just wants to cure Ted's injury. As a result, Abel accepts the arrogant noble's challenge while glancing at the doctor curing the little boy's fracture. Haughtily, Bass places a handicap for their battle until the magician stops him from doing so. Despite the advantages he can gain from Abel's refusal, the noble still views that as a mockery, filling himself with rage as he swings his blade with wind magic to attack Abel. The Grand Magician swiftly dodges the attack and notices that Bass's casting speed is too fast for his average attack power. Fortunately, the green-eyed noble notices his confusion and explains it himself as he introduces his regalia to the ignorant commoner. Bass's haughtiness reigns as he reveals that regalias are support items created with magic, but his explanation is a mere distraction to cast an offensive spell again. While dodging, Abel studies the mechanism of the mysterious item and finds out that it allows a person to use a spell simply by pouring magic into it. Displeased, the Grand Magician snaps Bass's attack into the disappearance and leaves the haughty noble confused while he's immersing himself in a realization that regalias are the cause of magic's decline. Abel concludes that current magicians focus on improving their use of the tool rather than their inner source, thus robbing them of a mage's thinking mind. Dissatisfied, the former hero mocks the opponent's magic by calling it a flying balloon, disabling Bass to control his anger as he attacks with offensive magic again. However, it is also time for Abel to counterattack as he casts the same wind spell, whose overwhelming power slashes the arrogant young man and makes him barely able to dodge the sorcery's impact. Abel approaches his opponent after the flashy spell and asks if he will give up, but Bass unsurprisingly refuses to end it with the commoner's victory. Finally, Lilith arrives and kicks the noble away, sending him into the distance. Surprised, Abel asks the maid what she's doing, so the demon princess smilingly calls her actions as taking care of garbage. The Grand Magician worries that it'll affect her job, but Lilith isn't concerned at all as she continues to threaten the haughty boy for insulting her master. Surprisingly, Abel wishes for Bass to be forgiven, but the demon princess isn't willing to do it despite her master's wishes. Complaints linger on the noble's mind, but he keeps them all to himself, knowing that Lilith will deliver his demise herself when he does say it. Frustrated, Bass screams in displeasure from his defeat. An hour later, Ted is finally delivered to his bed, only to hear from the doctor that he needs 6 months to recover. As he secretly watches, Abel discovers that even medical mages are also weakened, leading the former hero to reveal himself to the young noble and ask about his injury. Ted pretends that he's okay, but his exhaustion forces him to sleep, allowing the Grand Magician to perform his recovery and body-strengthening spells in secret to cure the boy's injury. When the healing ritual ends, Abel immediately leaves the room and lets his sparring partner rest. After the incident, Bass's father and the head of the Langobard family, Evans, kneel in apology to Abel as he begs for forgiveness for the rudeness of his son. However, Bass, who goes semi-bald, is against this humiliation and refuses to say sorry to the presumed Lilith's little brother. Evans suddenly punches his son's head and informs the ignorant young man that it is the demon princess who hired their family and not the other way around. Dumbfounded, Bass can't believe the sudden revelation, but Abel, on the other hand, now solves the mystery of why the demon princess herself serves a mere human noble. Desperate, Evans pleads with the Grand Magician not to severely punish them, but Abel is not angry in the first place and forgives the two. Immediately, the head of the noble family expresses his thanks, despite his son being consumed in rage and humiliation. It is late at night in the noble's mansion when Bass requests his father to get rid of Lilith and Abel. Evans instantly refuses his son and informs him that their village won't flourish without the help of their maid, who he reveals is also their benefactor. Irritated, Bass assures his father they can rule their territory even without Lilith, but his loud voice wakes Ted up as he barges into the office with his sleepy face. Surprised, Bass wonders how can his younger brother move like he's completely healed, but those facts mysteriously ring a bell to Evans. Finally, his son asks him why they need to pay respect to their mere maid, but despite knowing the whole truth, the family head decides not to tell Bass about it. The noble's son is displeased by his father's refusal, but he gives up on asking and demands Evans recommend him to the Arsulia Magic Academy instead. Surprised by the boy's demand, Evans ponders about the prestigious school, which requires at least 5 years to graduate, and refuses Bass's again, as he wants him to study to become their territory's lord. However, the young noble is firmly determined to learn powerful magic that is fearsome enough to cut down his enemies and become the strongest magician that commoners and even nobles will fear. Worried, Ted stops his brother for more terrifying thoughts, but Bass makes him his target of scorn and blames the little boy for the humiliating incident, calling him out for acting friendly toward Abel. Evans realizes that Bass is not worthy of being their lord at this rate, forcing him to permit the haughty kid to enroll in Arsulia Magic Academy, with a satisfied yet sinister smile. Bass leaves his father pondering about his evilness, but he then notices his mischievous younger son showing more maturity than his arrogant older brother. As a result, Evans reveals the past to Ted when Lilith saves him from a demon attack, and eventually becomes his advisor and teacher in managing the village. At that time, he asks the demon princess about her reasons for helping him, and finds out that it is all for a peaceful life when her beloved one wakes up. That statement confuses Evans in the past, but the current events finally make him understand the demon's words at that time. Therefore, the nobleman reminds his son to get along with the two, but Ted already has it in mind as he declares that Abel is his precious friend, contrary to Bass's animosity. 1 month has passed, and Ted still barges into the Grand Magician's study room and pesters him into doing their usual routine. Abel scolds him for not being quiet, but the young noble ignores all of that and urges the magician, who he is now calling his teacher, to instruct him more about magic. Suddenly, Abel points out Ted's full recovery from his injury, and gets up from his seat to invite the young noble to continue their little game of tag. Ted is surprised by the long-awaited invitation and excitedly announces his will to win, leading the mentor to give advice about body strengthening before starting. In a blink of an eye, 2 years have already passed, and the story continues when the two are riding in a carriage for almost half a day on their way to take the entrance exam for the Arsulia Magic Academy. Along the way, Abel engages in a conversation with Lilith, revealing his plan to be an adventurer in the future, only to discover that the said job is already unavailable as the monsters for subjugation quests are almost gone. Moreover, the former hero learns that working as a magician again requires him to attend an academy. Abel's decision is conflicted, but Lilith's teasing about him mooching off her forces the Grand Magician to apply to the prestigious school, bringing us to the current situation. In a span of 2 years, Abel learns that magic's decline is not the regalia's fault alone, as he also discovers the usefulness of that equipment in everyday life. Along with that change is the growth of the young noble who learns to thank his mentor, as he also turns respectful, different from his mischievous and immature self, despite his hardships in learning magic these past few years. Finally, the two aspiring students arrive at the prestigious Arsulia Magic Academy, where Ted feels starstruck at the sight of the wonderful school. However, their amazement gets spoiled by two academy students who mock the two and treat them as existences not worthy of stepping foot in their institute. Abel is still composed while watching the low-quality students and listening to their mockery, but Ted is already blowing his fuse as he urges his teacher to teach them a lesson. When the discrimination against the amber-eyed magician gets worse, someone arrives to stop the ill-mannered nobles as the red-eyed girl with a crest named Eliza confronts the guys for insulting the commoner. Brimming with confidence, Eliza intimidates the bully by introducing herself and declaring that she will be a great magician someday. Unfortunately, the two don't feel the slightest threat as they are now the ones who frighten the examinee, leading Ted to urge his teacher to help Eliza. However, the Grand Magician knows that the girl is strong as he watches her slashing the bully's clothes at a tremendous speed, warning the two chickens to get out of her sight. Terrified, the cowards run away from Eliza, so Abel starts to thank their fellow examinee until she brushes his hand out in disgust at the amber-eyed commoner. Eliza explains that he helped him out of irritation to the weak bullies and leaves after telling the Grand Magician to be strong for her to notice a plebeian like him. Confused, Ted ponders about the girl's complicated personality, but Abel, on the other hand, feels that he has met Eliza before. In the classroom, the exam eventually begins with a 100-score written test that the former hero is not having trouble answering. The test starts from general education questions to magic language and engineering, which Abel finishes without any difficulties, opposite to Ted, who struggles with every question he encounters. However, the biggest problem finally pops out and leaves even the Grand Magician thinking as he ponders about the question, asking him to prove that magic cannot create a human soul based on Deeparonic's final theorem. The examinees are unexpectedly having a hard time answering, but Abel feels the opposite as he's the one who made the said theorem. 200 years ago, the 10-year-old Abel joined the trend of human body modification and ended a researcher's cruel experiment by publishing Deeparonic's final theorem anonymously and declaring that creating a living soul through magic is impossible. Fortunately, the theorem, which is named based on a neighbor's dog, contributes to his completion of reincarnation magic. But Abel presently realizes that the theorem is incomplete and wonders if he should correct the thesis, which he is too embarrassed to remember. Finally, the written exam ends, but things don't seem well to Ted, who cries at the difficult questions. Fortunately, his most awaited skill test arrives when the teacher comes to guide them on the training grounds when the next phase of the exam begins. Abel and Ted eventually reach the vast field where training targets are set up for them to attack later. For the practical skill test, the instructor urges the examinees to pick regalia according to their eye color. However, the absence of weapons for amber-eyed forces able to grab a random fire sword. His fellow aspiring students are displeased by this, but the examiner silences them to explain the goal of the test, urging the examinees to shoot magic at the target. The Grand Magician concludes that the ones with high inborn magic power will reign as he watches Ted volunteering to be the first to start. Unfortunately, his mentor worries that he will just be humiliated in front of other examinees. But the exam finally starts as Ted casts a fireball toward the target. His student's magic takes Abel aback, but it is because of the terrible firepower of the spell, despite it hitting the target right on the mark. In spite of that, the Grand Magician learns that a dark matter ore is used on the dummies, but the examiner's reaction catches Abel off guard as he hears her praising Ted's performance exaggeratedly. Same with the examinees who can't believe the greatness of the noble from the countryside. On top of that, even a veteran examiner acknowledges Ted's talent, which fires up the other aspiring students to give their all in using their regalias. However, the abilities they show are still a disappointment in the eyes of the Grand Magician. Finally, the examiner urges him to start the test, but even she is under the assumption that Abel can't use any magic. The amber-eyed magician ignores her doubt and proceeds to take the exam as he modifies and boosts his weapon first, before releasing its limiter and casting numerous fireballs to spread destruction to the target. As a result, a large crater forms in the training field, and both the examiner and students are dumbfounded by the terrifying display the fireballs bring. But while Abel is disappointed by the target's inferior dark matter ores, his fellow examinees, who are nobles, cannot believe that a lowly commoner beat them. In contrast, Ted is ecstatic as he praises his mentor, who melts the target into ashes. The story transitions into Eliza's side as she wanders in the academy and heads toward the training grounds. Suddenly, she hears other examinees gossiping about her act of protecting the amber-eyed commoner and refers to that as disgusting, leading Eliza to assume that only a few of these worthless bunch will pass the entrance exams. However, the girl's turn to start finally comes, so she gracefully introduces herself and takes their breath away with her elegance. Flustered, the examiner urges the lady to begin, allowing Eliza to start her chant at the regalia and releases a wave of flame edge, which damages the target made by a sturdy dark matter ore. The witnesses can only gasp in shock at Eliza's surprising display of strength, but the examinees wonder how she can use the flame edge ability when the supposed spell should be a fireball. As they assume that Eliza cheated, the instructor named Phidia knows what really happened. Finally, the talented lady shocks the ignorant students by revealing that she rewrites the regalia's source, and Phidia fortunately allows the examinee's method, knowing that it is the way magic should be. However, seeing the professor makes Eliza more alarmed as she concludes that the woman before her is the one in charge of the exam. To their surprise, the examiner from the other group rushes toward Phidia, panicking as she reports the amber-eyed examinee who melts the target with a single fire magic. Eliza is surprised to hear this, while Phidia interrogates the examiner for more details about the examinee. As a result, she reveals Abel's name for all of them to hear, including Eliza, who remembers the commoner's name as she giggles from excitement at the interesting turn of events. Meanwhile, in the school hall, Ted yells his excitement upon knowing that he'll be in the same class as his mentor. Finally, the two reach the door leading to A class, but the expression on the students' faces is full of wariness after seeing the two now that the rumors about the skill test incident have already spread. Abel ignores the nasty treatment when a wild Eliza appears to sit next to him, causing the Grand Magician to sigh at the irritated girl and remind her what she said, that commoners shouldn't get friendly with nobles. Troubled, Eliza explains that she just doesn't like weaklings and implies that it is just the strong who she is interested in. Suddenly, she asks the Grand Magician if he really destroyed the target in the practical exam, as the rumor said. Eliza bombards Abel with questions regarding his magic, but the teacher's arrival puts their conversation to a halt, as Phidia announces that she'll take charge of the final exam. Therefore, the reincarnated magician urges the noble lady to continue their story next time, and Eliza agrees despite her mysterious gaze upon revealing she knows the contents of the next test. Finally, Phidia reveals the last challenge as a one-on-one duel, where they need to destroy their opponent's magic defense to win. The teacher then posts the selected pairings based on the previous exam results, revealing that Ted is not Abel's opponent, but the one with the number 86. With an excited grin, Eliza introduces her number to the Grand Magician and informs him that she'll be her enemy. While the talented noble is excited, Phidia leads the students to the exam site and casts a defensive barrier in each of the students' bodies. Finally, the duel between Eliza and Abel has been announced, but despite the unwanted attention they get from fellow examinees, the noble lady excitedly urges her opponent to start. The prodigy has a smile as she urges Abel to grab his own weapon, but the Grand Magician reveals that he doesn't use any regalia. Unfortunately, the reincarnated magician doesn't bother to explain his reasons, but he still assures Eliza that it'll be a good fight. The noble lady accepts the magician's method and charges toward him with tremendous speed. However, the fabulous quickness she shows is nothing to the former hero, who views the girl as a mere still image. Immediately, Eliza slashes her opponent, but the Grand Magician evades her physical attack along with the flame edge that comes right after that. As a result, Abel finds out that the walls around them are also made with dark matter ore, but his distractive thoughts irritate the prodigy, causing her to attempt to slash once more. All the evasion bores out the former hero, so he casts a counterattack flame edge spell toward Eliza, creating explosive destruction while the girl is still in the area. While Ted and the examiner are shocked, the Grand Magician worries that he has gone too far with his attack. Still, those concerns disappear with the appearance of the noble lady, who manages to dodge the spell as she dashes toward Abel with her regalia. The girl's ability fascinates the former hero, so he stops showing mercy and activates numerous burning bullets, sending them straight to Eliza. This time, the prodigy can no longer evade as she struggles to stand after the spell's aftermath. As a result, Phideon puts the duel to a halt, so the school nurse rushes to Eliza's aid, but the girl rejects his help and wants the fight to continue in the form of a personal duel instead. The noble doesn't even wait for Abel's permission and goes to prove that she's the strongest, leading the magician to ask her reasons for gaining strength in a peaceful era. In reply, Eliza declares that peace is only imaginary and informs Abel that the neighboring kingdom, Cordrea, is already preparing for the great war against demons that may occur someday. Reveals strife against the opposing race that the higher-ups hide from the public, and yells her disagreement to believe the make-believe peace as she continues to raise her weapon, not just to prove that she's strong, but also to rebuild the house of nobility that raised her. Hearing that, Abel assumes that Eliza's family has met their downfall due to their dangerous preparation for war, but that thought gets interrupted by Eliza's activation of forbidden art, the rose madder sky. Immediately, Abel uses his analytical eye to assess the magical formula that surpasses the level of a mere student, but then notices that he has seen it before. To his surprise, the prodigy casts a skill brought by his forbidden arts, which forms a pair of wings that enable Eliza to fly above her opponent. The examinees are surprised by the magic that should have existed only in the legends, but the Grand Magician finally concludes something about her identity as he witnesses Eliza's determination to beat him. With the girl's secret technique revealed, the duel continues with Abel praising the red-eyed prodigy's effort in his mind, while watching the smug girl who assumes it's his first time seeing the flight ability. Unfortunately, the former hero has seen it so many times, so he is able to quickly put a dispel magic circle around the noble, eventually canceling the forbidden arts, which causes Eliza to fall. As the maiden screams, the Grand Magician hurries to catch her body despite being reluctant to do it at first. With Abel's help, Eliza safely lands with a blushing face, but the former hero suddenly asks if she's a descendant of the hero of the fire, Maria. The red-eyed maiden is confused about how he knows it, but her personality and magic confirm Abel's hunch that Eliza is the descendant of his former companion. Suddenly, he tells the oblivious girl that she looks exactly like the muscle-brained woman he knows and motivates her to try harder, leaving all of them in surprise and confusion as Phedia declares the winner. A commotion forms from the examinees, who can't believe it, but Eliza, on the other hand, is wondering who Abel really is. Meanwhile, the instructors are having a discussion about the students who they call the G3, the three geniuses named Ted, Eliza, and Abel. The teachers are delighted by the news that may possibly revive their reputation as the kingdom's best magic academy. But a well-known instructor, Emerson, joins their conversation to tell them that the real genius is Abel alone. Unfortunately, those words are insufficient to convince other professors, but Emerson can't still stop thinking about the boy who perfectly solves Deeperonic's final theorem. While he's immersed in his own thoughts, the headmaster, who we will call Michael, arrives and comments about Emerson's unusual interest in the new student. To his surprise, the instructor even assures him that Abel will be their kingdom's great asset. But Michael's reaction upon learning the name of the amber-eyed talent is so mysterious that it confuses the oblivious teacher. With the headmaster's request, Emerson presents the greatness of their new talent, but the look on the principal's face worsens as he denies some thoughts inside his head. In a dark basement, the headmaster can be seen walking downstairs as he mysteriously clicks a knight statue's magical sword. Suddenly, an enormous door opens and leads Michael to his secret office, where he grabs an old letter from the desk, revealing the message of his ancestor. The letter from the hero of wind, Roy, confesses that an amber-eyed magician named Abel defeated the Demon King alone, and not them, the Great Four Sages, as history declares. By reading the message once more, the headmaster remembers his grandfather saying that the Great Four Sages have lost a fifth person. Michael starts to wonder if their new talent is the same unsung hero. However, the principal is still troubled about what to do to affirm the new student's abilities. Now that the entrance exam has ended, the former hero is enjoying his tea in a shop, where everyone is drinking the coffee that was once called the Devil's Drink in his past timeline. However, his quiet tea time is interrupted by Ted's excited yells as he enters the shop and heads to his mentor, showing him the envelope depicting his test results, which scream Ted's victory for passing it. Excited, he teases his teacher by opening his envelope, but Abel sees no need to do it after noticing the signs of the already opened letter. As a result, the Grand Magician moves on to the main topic and asks his student about the girl stalking him. Eliza immediately hides when she hears that, but Ted is already aware of her presence from the beginning, leading the noble prodigy to show her embarrassed self while pretending that their meeting is a mere coincidence. Shamelessly, Eliza acts like she's looking for cupcakes in the store, but Abel is not interested in small talk and urges Maria's descendant to state her reasons to ascertain that she doesn't have hostile plans. To his surprise, the maiden just wants to know about what class they are in, but the cautious former hero is confused as he wonders what merit she'll get upon learning it. However, Eliza's expression is devoid of any lies, so he and Ted decide to inform the prodigy that they belong in a class. The maiden's face brightens after knowing she'll be together with Abel in the classroom, so she happily bids goodbye to the two to buy a bag of cookies from the shopkeeper. Unfortunately, Eliza leaves the store with Abel, still not having any idea why his former companion's descendant approaches them. In contrast, Ted feels excited by the turn of events, but he begins to worry about moving out to stay in the student dormitory. The student worries that his mentor will get separated from Lilith if he does the same, but those concerns disappear with the demon princess's appearance, surprising Ted while making Abel wonder why she's wearing a different outfit. As a result, Lilith reveals that she's now a teacher in the Arsulia Magic Academy, but the Grand Magician is not even surprised as he is aware of the connections and life experiences of that demon princess. Grinningly, Lilith explains that there is simply a vacant position, but the now teacher treats this convenience as a way to support her master, who smiles at the woman's impressive cleverness. On the other hand, Ted views this as a chance to be trained by his mentor, who finally gives him a low score on the skills test, as the three share a good giggle before their school life begins. In Lilith's mansion, on the day of another departure to the academy, the demon princess urges the Grand Magician, who is reminiscing, to head out, wondering if Abel feels reluctant to leave the house he has resided in since his reincarnation. Surprisingly, the former hero is attached to the mansion, but Lilith notices that and assures him that they'll go back, leading Abel to exit the house, where they stumble upon the excited Ted urging his mentor to hurry to enter the carriage. Finally, the Grand Magician takes his seat, and the vehicle finally begins its trip toward the academy. Having a nap, Abel wakes up and sees Lilith at his side, smiling as she asks her master if he gets enough sleep. Suddenly, the demon princess leans closer to Abel, only to be reminded to keep their relationship in mind, especially in the academy. Unfortunately, their alone time ends as Abel releases the silencing magic he casts earlier on the sleeping Ted to wake him up. Despite his efforts, the young noble is still not getting up from his slumber, so Abel creates a minuscule fireball and puts it on top of the guy's forehead, forcing him to wake up from the burning nightmare. Abel informs Ted, who assumes that the flaming sensation is a mere terrible dream, that they're near their destination. Just when they're talking, Lilith tells the two that they finally arrive in the student dormitory that is reserved only for the first years. The three exit the carriage, but the novice teacher informs them of her leave, as she needs to do her tasks as a newly appointed instructor. The hero reincarnate lets the demon princess go, so he and his student enter the dormitory, where Abel notices an intruder countermeasure right after entering the door. To their surprise, Fadia, the in charge of their building, greets them with a serious face and hands them their academy uniform. The teacher reminds the new students to wear them all the time when they're outside, but the Grand Magician is more curious about the outfit's enchantment and finds out they have magic and stain resistance, whose quality disappoints the hero reincarnate to a tremendous level. Finally, the gray-eyed teacher gives them the key to their room on the second floor, but then strangely advises them to check the training gym, disappointed that almost every student neglects their physical training. Inside room 238, Ted opens up a conversation about Fadia, assuming that her strangeness is a hindrance for her to be popular. But Abel changes the conversation and tells his student that he'll redo his uniform enchantment. The young noble is happy about this, but he asks his mentor about enchantment as he has no idea what it is. While Abel is improving the clothing's properties, a lecture goes on as Ted reviews the specialties of each eye color and learns from his mentor that black-eyed magicians are mainly good in production and granting magic, just like what enchantment does to things and weapons. However, Abel notices that his student is not getting his message, so he gives the improved uniform that Ted immediately puts on, despite having no idea what the changes really are. To his mentor's confusion, the noble shows a snowball-steamed bun, his made-up local delicacy that he will now give their neighbors and befriend them. Abel thinks it'll be unexpectedly easy for his student, but a loud, irritated yell interrupts those thoughts as he looks outside and sees Ted being confronted by higher-ranking nobles. Enraged, an elite student named Mars views Ted's gift as an insult, despite the new student's simple wish to befriend them. Mars and his lackeys spout more mockery to the boy, who they call trash, and even compare him to a poison perch that disturbs its surroundings simply by existing. In spite of that, Ted still hands him the steamed buns, but the elite student with anger issues slaps the delicacies away until they fall so he can kick the food in front of the boy who brings it for them. Abel silently watches as the cruel act goes on until he finally decides to interrupt. However, Eliza's sudden arrival foils his idea as she suddenly picks up the food on the floor, surprising the elite students as they witness the prodigy's surprising actions. Ignoring that, Eliza scores the delicacy with 70 and suggests adding local flavors, but she can't still turn a blind eye to the elite students, who she calls ill-mannered for their abuse of the newcomers. The childish lackey can only spout insults to Eliza, but Abel can't bear to watch anymore, so he tells Maria's descendant to leave it all to him. Eliza blushes from shock, but Mars's surprise is different as he and his friends laugh at the amber-eyed magician and belittle him, leading Abel to realize that they must be from the higher class to insult them this way. Calmly, the Grand Magician tries to reconcile both parties, but Ted is filled with rage as he headbutts the rude noble for insulting his teacher. The impact strikes Mars away, surprising everyone present in the scene, especially the lackey who sees their leader losing consciousness. Unsurprisingly, the elite students are enraged at the culprit, so the two rush to get their revenge. But when the guy's punch quickly approaches Ted's face, a defensive barrier activates and strikes them away, preventing them from getting close. Mysteriously, even Ted is confused, along with the two, who wonder why they are getting repelled. In contrast, the Grand Magician is not dumbfounded like his student, as he knows that it's his enchantment that causes the surprising phenomenon. Despite their frustrations, the two can only run away without even recognizing Abel's enchantment. But the same goes for Ted, who feels ecstatic as he assumes that his hidden power is finally awakening. However, Eliza notices the uniform's enchantment and discovers they are all extraordinary, leading her to ask Ted who the enchanter is. Abel looks into his student's eyes to stop him from revealing it, but Ted misunderstands his message, so he drags him away before his moron of an apprentice tells the whole story. However, Eliza still gets the idea that it is Abel all along, making her wonder who the mysterious, powerful student really is. Outside the dormitory, Ted eventually realizes that it is his teacher's enchantment that saved him earlier from the rude bullies. To express gratitude, the young noble gives his mentor one of the delicious delicacies that haven't fallen on the floor earlier. Abel takes a bite, but tells Ted the taste is only average, but the mentor still advises his apprentice to lower its temperature by using enchantment, thus improving its local flavor based on Eliza's suggestion. Unfortunately, he refuses to teach the method, but it still doesn't hinder Ted from working hard for his plan of making 100 friends. The Grand Magician smiles at his students' liveliness as they suddenly wonder why Eliza is in the boys' dormitory. Meanwhile, the girl in question remembers she failed to invite Abel to check the dorm together. Finally, the first day of school arrives, but the two are already running late for the summons of the principal due to Ted feeling nervous about the incident in the dormitory. Worried, the young noble wonders if the teacher already knows what they did, so he plans to apologize to the three. However, Abel has other concerns after reaching the door as he notices a magic gimmick when they open it, resulting in him asking Ted to lead the way when they enter. The young noble is confused, but the Grand Magician doesn't give any explanations and simply opens the large door. Suddenly, a strange mechanism activates, along with the activation of marching music that welcomes the two inside the room. The students assume that Ted is the one who triggers it among the two, and the headmaster finally makes his appearance after the night's march that was last heard 20 years ago. As he stands at the front, Michael congratulates the new students for their successful enrollment when Ted suddenly gives Abel a trivia, informing him that the principal is Roy's descendant. The former hero feels nostalgic after hearing his former companion's name again, but Michael's speech eventually ends as he introduces the new instructor. Without further ado, Lilith presents herself with a dazzling smile that mesmerizes both genders in the room. However, its gorgeousness goes up after seeing her master in the whole crowd of students. Abel is listening to the delusionary people who assume the smile is directed at them when he notices the existence of something spying on him. Surprised, Ted wonders why his mentor is alarmed, but the Grand Magician brushes it off as nothing, as there's no animosity from the unknown stalker. Finally, the two reach the classroom, but their classmates are clearly ostracizing them right off the bat, including Mars's lackeys, who glare at them. To Abel's surprise, their fellow outsider joins the conversation, leading him to ask Eliza why she is sitting next to him. Unfortunately, that's where their banter ends as their teacher Emerson arrives and mysteriously glances at Abel's direction. The gossip of the amazed students surprises the Grand Magician, so he asks Ted about their instructor, and learns that Emerson is the master in modern magic and the development of regalias, making him their era's strongest magician. Despite that, Abel is still not amazed, and instead feels the opposite as he notices the ominous aura, the same as the one from the entrance ceremony. All of a sudden, a curious student asks why he's unusually going to take charge of their class despite his busyness doing research. To their surprise, Emerson reveals he wants to be a teacher to get funds for his study easily, but his smile turns sinister while informing them of something he wants to confirm as he looks at Abel. Finally, the strange instructor leaves the room, and only Ted is dissatisfied with the lack of self-introduction, as Eliza also notices Emerson's strangeness. Time passes and the class ends, so Abel makes his way to the dormitory until he stumbles into Lilith on the way. The former hero informs the demon princess that Ted is in his own venture to make friends, enabling Lilith to check the surroundings before asking permission to kiss Abel. Even though the Grand Magician is troubled, The new teacher continues her romantic plan until Abel reminds her to be careful when they're in the academy. However, the magician notices an ominous presence forcing him to use magic to destroy a magical item spying on them. Lilith is taken by surprise, so Abel informs her of the intense gaze he has felt from Emerson since the entrance ceremony. Still, he stops the demon princess from conducting an investigation and advises her to be careful instead. Meanwhile, the culprit is looking at his monitor, wanting to put an audio recorder device to the spying regalia, excited that there's finally a magician stronger than him. A few days have passed since the incident, but the lessons in the class of the current teacher in front are still too dull for the Grand Magician. In the middle of writing magic equations, the instructor erases the important lessons, infuriating the students like Ted, who is still not finished writing them. In contrast, the Grand Magician is disappointed at the low-level classes of the teacher and views them only as a waste of time. However, the instructor makes him the target of shame by forcing Abel to answer a complex problem. Without hesitation, the former hero heads in front of the class and answers the simple question, leaving the professor dumbfounded after he sees the correct solution to the magical problem. Immediately, Ted praises his teacher, but surprisingly, two girls in the class improve their opinions of the amber-eyed student. Contrary to those ladies, Mar still harbors animosity toward the Grand Magician. When the class ends, so is Abel's personal research in the Academy's little library, rather than the wider one the school also has. Therefore, the Grand Magician appreciates the environment, but he suddenly catches sight of Eliza, who comes to the unpopular small library to study. Abel is still having a hard time believing that their meeting is a pure coincidence, but he decides to let the noble lady study at the same table as him. Eventually, the former hero notices that Eliza is having a hard time, so he lends a hand to the struggling girl to solve a mathematical problem. The noble lady is amazed after successfully answering the practice question, as she also makes Abel think that Eliza is better than his original apprentice, Ted. Unfortunately, nighttime arrives, so the two start to head home, but that becomes the lady's opportunity to thank her classmate. Eliza expresses gratitude to the Grand Magician and suddenly invites him to spend time in the royal capital. Embarrassed, the noble lady explains that it is all to thank him for his help, so they can enjoy the food famous in the place. Feeling excited, and even invites Abel to go to a bookstore. Fortunately, the former hero accepts the invitation, so the delighted maiden talks about food again until a group of young boys blocks their way. Finally, their leader, Mars, shows himself, but Abel initially has no idea who he is until remembering the headbutt incident with Ted. His attitude becomes too annoying for Mars, so they accuse Abel of using a dirty trick to enter the prestigious school, leading the four to threaten the newcomer in a battle of regalias. In a blink of an eye, the weapons they carry mysteriously disappear from their hands as they are dropped onto the ground by the Grand Magician who is holding Mars's regalia after stealing it from him. Abel notices that the magic item is locked for enchantments and tells its owner that his regalia is already in bad shape. Suddenly, the magician shows the weapon's destroyed parts and throws it to the arrogant elite student, who can only stare in confusion at his regalia. Before leaving, Abel grabs Eliza's shoulders and invites her to go, but the young maiden is too embarrassed to react properly to his invitation. Unable to fight back, Mars mumbles his vicious plan for tomorrow's class to bring down Abel, who is now sticking closer to Eliza as they escape the scene. The destined day arrives for Mars's revenge, but it turns out to be a physical education lesson for Class A. But while Ted is boiling with excitement, their attention shifts to their subject instructor, who is named Cantor, finally arriving in class and introducing himself with vigor. Surprisingly, the students are acting too close to Cantor as they tease his experiences with women, but Abel is displeased watching them. Same with Eliza, who hates the instructor for keeping the outsider students from their conversation. Unfortunately, Ted and Abel notice the same thing, but the class is already starting with Cantor announcing the hunt, the game that they'll be going to play. Abel and Ted have no idea what kind of sport it is, so the instructor starts the introduction by showing glove regalia. However, the students stop Cantor from saying any further, as they already know what the game is. The lack of description for outsider students shocks and enrages Eliza, so Ted tries his best to quell her anger, but the game's introduction eventually continues. Hunt is a sport involving the shooters as the attacker, while the defenders are called rabbits. To win the game, the shooters will shoot bullets at the rabbit, and the roles will switch every 5 minutes, where the team with the most defenders wins. Finally, Cantor urges the class to grab their gloves, but everyone except the outsider students has already brought their own. The game's introduction continues with the types of bullets, starting from spears specializing in speed, the balance sphere, and the disc that can change trajectory. Unsurprisingly, an outsider student, who we will call Yukari, is nervous, so Cantor assures them that the non-magical bullets can't hurt people at all. To prove that, the teacher suddenly shoots a bullet that generates a shockwave toward Ted, making him a laughingstock for his classmates. The same rage as Eliza befalls him, but another explanation arrives, reminding Abel that rewriting the glove's magic source and attacking opponents with spells are forbidden. Without further ado, the C team of Mars and his lackeys are formed against the D team of Abel and the outsider students. Unsurprisingly, unlike their opponents, Yukari and the other members worry about their disadvantage of being a random group. Still, the enemy's leader arrogantly declares his revenge on the amber-eyed magician. To make it worse, Abel notices that Cantor is an accomplice of the enemy team, and his own companions are not confident in their physical activities. The Grand Magician's teammates are talking themselves down as they don't think victory is within their reach, but Abel still prepares himself for the upcoming game. With a dazzling smile, Eliza assures them it'll be okay, but that still doesn't stop Yukari from worrying that Team C has something nasty prepared. Despite that, the red-eyed prodigy is confident that there will be no dirty game, but the former hero thinks the opposite because he knows that Mars and his companions are up to something. But with Eliza's signal, the dubbed three geniuses step up to start the match, as Cantor finally flips the coin to decide who will be the first shooters. Eliza and Mars each take their own guests, but the C team takes the offensive side in the end. When all the students finally take their positions, Cantor signals the start of the first match between the Three Geniuses team and Mars group with the instructor's help. Without wasting time, the leader of the shooters throws a spear at Abel, who successfully evades all of them. However, the Grand Magician notices a bullet in his apprentice's blind spot, but Ted, fortunately, avoids being hit by the continuous shooting, allowing the opponents to direct the shots to Abel instead. Swiftly, the former hero evades the spear and lets it head toward his companion, who also dodges it at the last minute. Mysteriously, the bullet, which is not a disc, changes its trajectory and hits the young boy from behind, sending him out of the match. The incident takes Abel by surprise, along with his teammates, who are too confused as to what has occurred. But with this, the Grand Magician finally confirms that Mars is cheating. Immediately, Cantor urges the students who are already out to exit the field, leaving them powerless to do anything regarding the rigged bullet. On top of that, Abel concludes that a target tracking property has been added to the enchanted gloves of their cheating opponents. Eliza also notices that, so she calls out Mars for his dirty tricks, but the elite student pretends like he doesn't do anything wrong and demands evidence from the red-eyed lady, verbally harassing her voluptuous figure. Embarrassed, Eliza flusters from being called thick, but Abel notices the enemy's diversion plan and saves his teammate from the spear that almost hits her. The noble lady is surprised by the enemy who tries to shoot from the side along with Abel, casually saving her without hesitation, so she surprisingly thanks the former hero with her brazen blush, while Ted is struggling to dodge the bullets thrown at him. As the yells of the audience resound, 1 minute has already passed since the game began, but the former hero is already getting bored from the continuous dodging. Suddenly, he notices Yukari warning Eliza of the approaching bullet, enabling the prodigy to avoid being hit by the opponent. As a result, Abel realizes the talents of his fellow outsider student when it comes to vision, but that's also the cue for the opposing team to make the girl their target. Without wasting time, Team C surrounds the helpless lady and shoots their own bullets toward her at the same time. Eliza worries about her new friend, but those concerns are nothing for Mars, who throws another spear at Yukari just to bring more cruelty to the outsider student. Alarmed, Ted and Abel watch their companion as she gets mercilessly showered by the opposing team's bullets. Unfortunately, Mars has no plans to stop the event, which he calls the Poison Perch Extermination, and even ignores Eliza's pleas to stop their unnecessary violence toward her teammate. However, the lady's begging leads to her downfall as she gets hit by an enemy's bullet. Despite all these, Abel is still calm and simply watches the two girls, while Ted protests his objections to their teacher, only to get smashed by a flying bullet from their enemy. The noble from the countryside tries to quell his rage as he apologizes to Abel for his rash actions. However, the former hero is the only one remaining, so Mars gets a boosted confidence to eliminate him from their match. Determined, Abel plans to avoid all the bullets until the timer ends, but his apprentice is still concerned about the numbers' disadvantage, until Eliza realizes that he hasn't stepped from his position since they left. While Ted is dumbfounded, frustration is the one that Mars feels after learning that they can't defeat the lone member of Team D. As a result, he urges his companions to use their combination attack as they summon scattered bullets and surround the Grand Magician with another cheat enchantment in their regalia. The elite student goes mad as he sends them toward the amber-eyed magician, who who refuses to dodge and reveal his superhuman strength, forcing Abel to cover his face as if giving up. Unsurprisingly, his enemy and companion are fooled by his act, as the scattered bullets are already on their way to eliminate Abel from the fight, until they suddenly break mid-air before they can come into contact with the Grand Magician. Mars is taken aback by the unexpected predicament, leading him and his team to assume that their regalia has malfunctioned. Resorting to a blatant lie, Abel makes it look like a dangerous overflowing of magic as he pretends to be oblivious to Team C's weapon's source being rewritten. When Cantor hears that, he stops the match from continuing and announces the end results of the first half with a lone rabbit surviving. In spite of Mars's frustration, Team D celebrates their small win with the exception of Eliza, who notices the anti-magic Abel used. However, the team's ace doesn't bother to explain, and instead urges them to start the strategy meeting that will let them grab the victory. Abel's declaration excites the team's assigned shooters to do their best, especially Eliza, who is prepared to get her revenge for earlier. Yukari is on the sidelines cheering them up as she rejects the proposal to be one of the shooters for the group. But that doesn't diminish the motivation of the shooters to win. However, their determination is a mere laughingstock for the enemies. Unfortunately, they successfully provoke the red-eyed lady, so Abel immediately calms her down as Cantor is now declaring the start of the match. With their formation ready, the second half finally begins, but a well-thought-out plan is also prepared for Team C as they quickly move into a strange formation. Abel immediately realizes what that is, but the two shooters assume they just make themselves an easier target, leading to their disappointment as Mars relays the information of the enemy bullets to enable his teammates to evade them easily. Their impeccable plan continues, but Ted is getting tired from not being able to hit a single rabbit. Moreover, the Grand Magician is aware of the flawlessness of the enemy's method, as well as that they will not win if their pointless shooting goes on. Not wanting to stand out, Abel informs his apprentice about what he has in mind, but their secrecy infuriates their lady teammate, who is not aware of what they will do now. The team's ace ignores that and leaves it all to his student, who makes the opponent dumbfounded as he suddenly starts an incantation that even his teacher doesn't expect. Even so, Abel sees no need to stop Ted and just lets him do it in his own way as the chant finally ends and the spell has been released. A significant number of bullets appear in the sky, and it is too late for Mars to be shocked as the spears are already heading their way and create a massive smoke that blinds even his teammates. When the smoke diminishes, what welcomes their sight is the elimination of the enemy team from the game, making Yukari and the whole group amazed by Ted. In contrast, Cantor grits from frustration, but with Mars and his team on all fours, the instructor declares the victory of Team D. Unbeknownst to them, a spying drone has been watching the events since the beginning. In Emerson's room, the headmaster can be seen talking with the genius instructor who immediately shows him the footage the regalia captures. Emerson points toward a certain scene that baffles Michael after seeing the disguised magic Abel used to make it look like Ted was the one who released the spell earlier. Excited, the teacher reveals that the student's method does not violate the rules, but another video catches the headmaster's attention. The real-time footage shows on the monitor, but that's until Abel glances at the spying regalia and shoots it down along with the video on the screen. To Michael's surprise, Emerson reveals that over 30% of drones have already been destroyed, but that doesn't stop the instructor, who is also known as the Young Lion, from obsessing over the mysterious student. Seeing that, Michael cannot help but think about the amber-eyed magician. Going back to the students, Abel raises his hands to shoot the drone, but tells Ted that he just saw a flying bug before they go together to the locker room. To their surprise, Mars is already there, but Ted still approaches him as he suddenly hands something to the scared elite student. Surprisingly, the kind noble still gives his bully a steamed bun, and still not giving up on making 100 friends. But Ted's genuine smile looks sinister for the inner circle student who desperately apologizes in terror. Eventually, Mars's group begs for forgiveness from Yukari in extreme fear of the student, who they now call the Demon King Ted. Another day in the academy arrives with Phedia wandering on the school grounds when she suddenly sees Lilith and invites her to talk for a moment. With a dazzling smile, the demon princess greets her fellow teacher back, but while they are talking, Phedia engages in her own thoughts, revealing the doubts and accusations most teachers have that Lilith used her connections to be employed by the academy. However, the new teacher's performance makes even Phedia acknowledge her in the end. Finally, the two reach the faculty room, where Cantor immediately greets the gorgeous Lilith a good morning. The demon princess returns the greetings, but the shameless instructor suddenly invites her to go out and drink when night comes. Immediately, the new teacher refuses Cantor's invitation, but Phedia can't let his disrespect continue, so she confronts the man to stop him. However, Cantor views her actions as jealousy for not being the one who gets asked out, but that's obviously not Phidia's intention, as she gasps in shock while listening to the insults of the man who reveals his dislikeness to go out with her. Full of arrogance, Cantor assures the 27-year-old woman that someone will eventually become her husband when the time comes. Phidia is shocked by the insulting remarks as she grits her teeth from frustration, but Lilith suddenly joins their conversation, making it seem like she'll accept the invitation only to reveal that the headmaster is looking for Cantor to talk about his favorable treatment of the group of students who cheated in the hunt. Dejected, the instructor leaves the room, and Phidia quells her irritation. However, the opposite of that happens when the class ends, and she heads to the training gym. Rage and frustration show on the woman's face, unable to handle the humiliation she got from Cantor. Even so, the teacher is aware that she's straying from the norm of getting married in their teens because of the muscle-headed personality that hinders her from having a lover. Phidia directs her frustration on physical exercises until she finishes a set and becomes satisfied by the muscles, which will never betray her. Suddenly, the figure of Abel exercising piques the interest of the muscle-headed woman as she looks at Abel and gets fascinated by the form of the amber-eyed student. Eventually, Phidia notices her weird thoughts and forces herself to stop the inappropriate imagination about the student by carrying some weights until her hand accidentally slips from the handle, leading to an accident. The teacher reflexively closes her eyes, so the figure of Abel lifting the barbell in one hand to save her both surprises and confuses the instructor. Despite the confusion, Phidia gets up to express her thanks, but the sudden stuttering makes Abel dumbfounded. Embarrassed, Phidia wonders why she can't properly say the words, but the amber-eyed student notices the instructor feeling distracted from the beginning. Phidia blushes upon hearing that and realizes that Abel is not as apathetic as she thinks. With a flustered face, the instructor thanks the student for saving her, allowing the amber-eyed magician to finally leave now that his routine has finished. Now that she's left alone in the gym, Phidia imagines Lilith becoming her sister-in-law, but the embarrassment of her inappropriate thoughts stops the muscle brain from wishing Abel to be her husband. Time passes by, and the Grand Magician is on his usual routine of studying in the dormitory when he remembers that today is the day of his promised date with Eliza. Therefore, Abel grabs a paper to write his permission letter before leaving the dorm, despite the possibility of the rotten teachers not permitting him. Fortunately, he discovers that Lilith is the current in charge for today, so he gives the letter with the assumption of getting allowed quickly. However, the demon princess is confused by her master's sudden request to leave and go to the capital. Moreover, Lilith remembers that Eliza also submitted the same letter, as she gets jealous upon assuming that Abel will go with her. The former hero decides to tease the demon princess, but Lilith releases her brakes and embraces her master with a passionate kiss to quell the jealousy she feels. Unfortunately, their actions are visible to the two students, who immediately walk closer to confirm if the two are really kissing. Lilith is still not letting go, but the girl is now taking a peek and sees that the new teacher is scolding the amber-eyed student instead. The two are surprised and confused that the scene between Lilith and Abel isn't what they're expecting, so they leave after learning that it's not interesting after all. The charade ends after they leave, but the demon princess is not regretting her reckless actions for wanting physical intimacy with Abel. Suddenly, Lilith blushes while explaining that she did not do it out of jealousy. However, the amber-eyed magician giggles after learning that even a demon like her feels agitated and continues teasing the new teacher and enjoys watching her adorable side. Finally, the Grand Magician arrives in the royal capital, where he discovers that there's still more time until their meeting. To his surprise, Eliza is already waiting for him in front of the clock tower, so he immediately walks closer and apologizes to the girl for making her wait. Hearing an apology from the former hero's mouth surprises Eliza, but she eventually ignores it to start her most awaited date as they head inside the clock tower and explore it. Along their short trip, the young maiden looks out the window and sees the beautiful scenery of the city and the sea where a magical steamboat is venturing. Surprisingly, the Grand Magician also feels amazed by the transportation, which he only sees in books, causing him to show a genuine smile that Eliza immediately notices. Abel notices the girl's gaze and interrogates her because of that, but their fun date still goes on with him enjoying the cultural things he is learning. In the middle of it, the red-eyed magician stops in front of the unfamiliar game center after hearing loud noises of people playing inside. Eliza nonchalantly informs Abel that the place is an establishment where people waste their money, making the former hero curious about the change in the people's interest from the war in the past toward entertainment. As a result, he invites Eliza to head inside and makes her excited as it'll also be her first time. Unbeknownst to the lady, Emerson's drone is watching their date from a distance, Eventually, the two head inside and discover the countless types of games that the customers are playing inside. Suddenly, Abel catches sight of the machines, but the two are unsure what they really are as Abel has only read about them in a book. The bookworm tells Eliza more about the slot machines, but a talking skeleton drives the young ones away from the game that only adults are allowed. Shocked, Eliza clings to Abel's arm until she realizes her embarrassing actions while listening to the skeleton urging them to head to the all-ages section. The two are forced to go to the place full of crane machines, but they are still enjoying it, especially the young maiden who sees a monster plushie and informs Abel that she likes that particular line of toys. Mysteriously, the former hero recognizes the monsters, and Eliza unconsciously confirms Abel's hunch by revealing that the designs are based on legendary beasts which existed in the past. The former hero concludes that they are the enemies he fought in the past, including the one named Jameis, which is Eliza's favorite. Excited, the girl continues to talk about the monsters, while wondering what it is like to fight them, leading Abel to reminisce about the past when he and his fellow heroes eliminated the mutated monster, who had already petrified 3 villages into stone. Abel's excitement causes him to tell the whole story of his battle without restraints until he realizes he's already going too far with the revelations. Fortunately, Maria's descendant treats that as a mere joke, because the young maiden has other concerns as she asks Abel if her preferences are weird compared to a normal girl. To Eliza's surprise, the amber-eyed magician tells her that a person's true nature is what really matters, thinking that a plushie of Jameis is cuter than the real one. When he turns around, Abel notices a horde of lecherous beasts ogling the figure of his companion, making him eager to leave the place. As he asks Eliza if she wants to get the doll, the noble lady thinks it'll be difficult, but the grand magician feels confident as he uses magic to analyze the slot machine and alternates its properties toward a high level. Determined, Abel plays around with the device until he successfully grabs Jameis and instantly gives it to the young maiden as a present. Flustered, Eliza accepts the gift with great appreciation, albeit Abel notices that she can't look him in the eyes at that particular moment. Unfortunately, that doesn't last long now that Eliza returns to herself as they eat the capital's famous dessert. Surprisingly, the glutton even asks for Abel's crepe and gobbles a single bite while shamelessly urging him to eat too. Maria's descendant feels delighted that her companion has taken a liking to the crepe, but her expression eventually turns into embarrassment when Abel mentions that what they did is exactly an indirect kiss. Despite being agitated, Eliza desperately pretends that she doesn't mind, but the former hero shifts his attention to the road's vibe, which is different from others. But while the maiden thinks it has the retro feels, nostalgia is what Abel has in mind, and that confuses his red-eyed classmate, who realizes something strange as she asks Abel who he really is. Finally, the question about the Grand Magician's identity comes out of the girl's mouth, but the former hero already expects this to happen, as he worries that his peaceful school life will be inevitably affected. Abel immediately thinks of his answer, when he suddenly notices something and asks Eliza to tilt her head. As soon as she does that, a magic bullet pierces Emerson's regalia and destroys it in one hit. His classmate is confused, but Abel reveals it's a mere bug as he ponders about Emerson and now plans to do something about him. However, Eliza knows the amount of power he used earlier and calls that his 100%, but that statement becomes an insult for the magician, because despite him not holding back, Abel declares that it's far from his full strength. The terrifying aura he emits terrifies Eliza to the point of dropping the teacup, but to her surprise, Abel catches the mug before it breaks. Therefore, the Grand Magician hands it back, but silence presides over the atmosphere until Abel breaks it by returning the topic to the question of who he really is. To his surprise, Eliza doesn't want him to answer anymore and tells him to forget that she questions his identity. Abel is relieved that he doesn't need to lie, so he accepts the girl's invitation to accompany her in the royal capital again, surprising Eliza, who is blushing from happiness. Finally, the date ends, so the two head toward the dorm, but Abel notices the presence of a human spy, contrary to Emerson's usual drones. As a result, he urges Eliza to go home first, and informs her of his unfinished business in the capital. The red-eyed lady sees her classmate off with a smile as they part ways for the day, allowing Abel to finally turn serious as he orders the stalker to come out. In front of a medium-sized tree, a woman with a witch hat, who we will call Musan, shows herself and smiles at the boy's brilliant plan of letting Eliza go first before confronting her. Immediately, Abel assesses the gray-eyed magician's abilities and concludes that she has the skill of transforming body color based on her surroundings. But the Grand Mage also notices that Musan is not alone. When he hears that, the stalker's green-eyed magician accomplice, dubbed Bardot of the Gale, finally reveals himself to their target, calling Abel a monster. The witch smirks after remembering that their client acknowledges the young-looking boy's strength, so Abel tries to confirm the identity of the man who hired them by asking. However, Bardot refuses to inform him who their client is. Despite that, the former hero is excited that the battle will definitely not be boring because of that, but the green-eyed opponent already slashes his regalia at Abel, who successfully dodges it. The two are excited to bring their target's demise, but the amber-eyed magician is raring to fight the interesting toys he finds without holding back. The showdown is hindered by a flashback of the young genius, whose circumstances are similar to a man fighting a bug or a human discussing stars with a monkey. The impossible cases, which are also the same as a prodigy, getting misunderstood by the majority, who thinks that he's doing nonsense. When he gets slightly older, Emerson sees boys the same age fawning over new regalia, leading him to volunteer to improve the weapon's magical structure. To his disappointment, the three refuse the offer and maintain their distance from the prodigy before talking behind his back, assuming that a genius like him is secretly looking down on their lowly kind. Loneliness begins to form inside the young boy, but Emerson still tries his best to be understood by everyone. Unfortunately, his futile efforts force him to realize that there's no need to level himself to the plebeians, but the frustrations are not helping him diminish his boredom. Emerson is aware that, like diamonds, there's no way he can polish himself to perfection without the presence of someone equal. In spite of the genius's desire to make everyone regret their prejudice toward him, his unpolished self cannot grant his own wish. Unable to find his equal, Emerson returns to doing his research until he stumbles upon the test paper of an examinee solving Deeperonic's final theorem. The genius's exhausted face turns into excitement after discovering Abel's existence and plans to use the boy to improve himself. Returning to the present, Emerson grins, thinking that Abel will not be able to defeat the two fighters he sent, and wonders how far the amber-eyed boy can go with the world's best magicians as enemies. With his excitement at its peak, Emerson opens a door leading to his hideout. However, what greets the dumbfounded magician's eyes after that is the alive body of his extermination target casually drinking coffee in his seat. Emerson cannot believe the scene in front of his eyes, so he asks how Abel enters the room that is protected by a barrier. But that flimsy thing doesn't even become a hindrance to the grand magician. The genius teacher is alarmed about Abel easily breaking the barrier, but he forces himself to stay calm and asks the student what he wants from him. Without wasting time, Abel orders Emerson to stop tracking his every movement and puts his charade to a halt after revealing that Moussan and Bardot tell the whole story. Chaos infiltrates Emerson's mind as he assumes that mind-controlling magic is used to force the professionals he hired to talk. So he asks the amber-eyed student what will happen upon his refusal despite the bucket of sweat running down his face. Releasing a terrifying intent, Abel threatens to end the teacher's life, making Emerson speechless as he is unable to handle the immense pressure. Eventually, the teacher admits his defeat and agrees to follow Abel, so the Grand Magician starts to leave until Emerson stops him to ask his reason for enrolling in the academy. To his surprise, the powerful mage reveals that he just wants to be a normal student, but that answer makes the genius insane as he questions why won't Abel use it to change the world. However, the former hero is no longer interested in those things as he leaves Emerson, who can only get down on his knees while remembering the ominous intent he receives from the student. Still, the aura he senses from Abel makes him amazed and excited by the surprising turn of events, as he now plans to surpass the amber-eyed mage someday. Meanwhile, the red-eyed lady is pondering about something while taking her evening bath, but those thoughts are revealed when she finishes and happily reminisces about her date with Abel. As she lies down on the bed, Eliza blushes while regretting her question about the boy's identity, despite knowing there's really something about the amber-eyed mage. Unfortunately, Eliza realizes that she isn't able to get closer to her crush at all, leading the maiden in love to embrace Jameis as she accidentally blurts out Abel's name. Surprised, Eliza blushes upon realizing her desire to see the mysterious magician, and wonders why she wants that in the first place. Desperate, the girl forces herself to believe that she just wants to thank him for the plushie, but then learns that ladies are forbidden to visit a boy's room. Fortunately, Eliza finds out that emergencies will render this rule useless, so she treats the situation as such, even though it's not. In the dark hallway, the noble lady sneaks out of her room and discovers that there's no one outside. However, Eliza realizes that using the stairs is too risky, as there's a great possibility the teachers will notice her. As a result, the red-eyed student jumps out of the window to cling over a large tree and sneaks to the lower floor's window to find Abel's room. Fortunately, it happens that the door is open, so Eliza heads toward there until she sees her classmates sitting next to Lilith. The young maiden is confused about what the new teacher is doing in a boy's room and continues listening to the two's intimate conversation. Unfortunately, the demon princess can't handle the urge anymore, so she leans closer to her master's face. Eliza's head is full of question marks, while accidentally witnessing the scene of her cool teacher sharing a passionate kiss with a young student, taking her aback as she wonders what the relationship between Lilith and Abel is. The next day, Eliza tells the whole story to Yukari and reveals her worries about the possibility of the two dating each other. As a result, the maiden-in-love falls into a slump, but Yukari assures her friend that there's nothing to brood over as she informs the dejected girl that Abel and Lilith are siblings. Surprised, Eliza confirms if it's really true and finds out that this pretense is a famous story between the first-year students. However, the scene last night is still unclear to the red-eyed lady, so she demands an explanation from her friend. But Yukari is under the impression that it's a mere goodnight kiss on the cheeks. Eliza's mind is still in shambles, but she eventually comes to terms with Abel and Lilith being ordinary siblings. Still, that relief leads to her hunger showing up, forcing Yukari into giving Eliza one of the meals she ordered. Finally, the maiden-in-love regains her cheerfulness as she talks about the delicious desserts, while Yukari wishes for her friend's success. In the gym, two students are talking about a guy who has been using the treadmill for about an hour, but their gossips are nothing for Abel, who continues to run. Suddenly, a loud yell catches the Grand Magician's attention, and it turns out it is Ted interrupting the training of his mentor. Distracted, Abel asks why he is looking for him, and discovers that the dubbed Demon King wants to know if he's decided on what research group to join. The former hero thinks about the academy system, which lets students work independently after school, remembering that most of them are only for amusement. The amber-eyed magician is both undecided and not interested in this kind of activity, but Ted shamelessly pushes his masters back to force him to go to the scouting event. On a serious note, Abel decides to witness the research group firsthand to determine their benefits. Outside the school building, Abel and Ted are overwhelmed by tons of people gathering and chattering around the academy. Unsurprisingly, various groups are trying to convince freshmen to join them, but Abel's decision not to join is still not changing. Suddenly, a terrifying upperclassman calls Ted, but the outsider student is too scared. So the man in armor, who introduces himself as Seagull, apologizes and immediately persuades the young boy to join his group, which specializes in armor fights. Seagull introduces the nature of the sport as a fast-paced game, known as the fastest martial art in the world, so Ted carefully thinks about the idea and declares he wants to join along with his mentor. The Grand Magician is displeased after hearing that, when the captain of the group interrupts their conversation and discriminates against the Great Magician. Disappointed by the captain's remarks, Abel urges Ted to take their leave and reveals that he has zero interest in playing around with a ball. Shocked, the large man gets enraged by the insult and orders Abel to repeat his words. Despite the captain's scary aura, the Grand Magician is unfazed as he repeats the same thing and escalates the anger of the man in armor, who proceeds to attack Abel. In a swift move, the amber-eyed magician dodges the captain's charge and steals the ball from his hand as he listens to the raging captain, asking him to give it back. Without hesitation, Abel flicks the ball straight to his opponent's face, which causes him to fall to the ground while insulting him inside his mind. Witnessing the commotion, the students gather around Abel and Ted and plan to recruit them in their own groups. In a short period, a horde of recruiters chases the two as they run. However, a hand suddenly grips Ted's shoulder and manages to abduct the boy to force him to join them. With his apprentice's sacrifice, Abel escapes while silently cheering for the young noble's fate. Successfully running away from recruiters, the former hero walks around the academy to look for research groups, but all that he encounters so far do not reach his criteria. Despite that, Abel learns that seniors are recruiting external students like him, and there are few discriminations among them. However, those thoughts are hindered by a madman from the Magic Eradication Research Group, persuading the students to join their grand plan. The former hero gets irritated by their yells until he suddenly hears a familiar voice and sees Bass among the weird people joining their persuasion. Hearing that shocks the former hero, as he wonders why Bass joins this kind of group. But while he is staring at his former enemy, Seagull interrupts and apologizes on behalf of his captain's behavior by offering a sports drink. Abel assures him that he is fine with it, and instead asks the armored man about the group on the other side of the road. As a response, Seagull explains that those guys are what they call AMO, an anti-magic organization, and is also the largest irritating bunch in the country who advocate for peace by wanting to eradicate magic. Surprisingly, the former hero worries about AMO's threat, but Seagull changes the topic's conversation and persuades him to join his group specializing in armor fights, However, the amber-eyed magician reveals his interest in joining a magic research group, even though he can't find one that is advanced enough for him. Hearing that, Siegel urges Abel to follow his lead, and the Grand Magician agrees as he glances at Bass's immense change before following the man in armor. Eventually, the two arrive at their destination, where Siegel points toward a lone mysterious girl known as the Ice Queen, Noel. Glancing at the mysterious lady, Siegel introduces the meek student who is simply reading a book to Abel, who curiously asks about the unusual nickname of the Ice Queen. As a result, the man in armor reveals that the strange yet powerful girl has no acquaintances and never smiles at anyone, but he still thinks that Abel will be a great fit, as the amber-eyed student notices that the Ice Queen is stronger than Eliza, and he thanks Siegel's assistance while bidding goodbye. Immediately, Abel walks towards Noel as he observes the girl's blue eyes while asking for her spare time. However, the Ice Queen answers coldly without looking at him, so the Grand Magician continuously stares at the lady, who finally replies, allowing Abel to state his objective to join the ancient magic research group. Hearing that, Noel challenges Abel to solve a puzzle called Magic Labyrinth, which is used to assess one's magical decryption skills. The Grand Magician tweaks over the item made by Noel and successfully solves it in a short amount of time, surprising the Ice Queen, who wonders if it is broken, as it should generally take longer to solve it. But while she's confused, the amber-eyed magician urges her to keep the promise, so Noel gets up to guide Abel to the club room. Eventually, the two reach a dark hallway, where a sign warning the student to keep out can be seen, but the Ice Queen is mysteriously not explaining why they're entering the off-limits area. Suddenly, Noel takes out a keystone and puts it in a strange statue, which magically opens the door and allows the Ice Queen to welcome the newcomer to her research group. The meek girl reveals that she's the only member of the club, so the Grand Magician blames it on the difficult entry test. But while he's wandering, Abel notices a unique ancient book that is already 50 years old, and asks Noel if she owns one that is 100 years old. Unfortunately, Noel reveals the large incident that happened 100 years ago that caused the burning of ancient magic books. The Ice Queen elaborates on the tragedy after the four great sages defeat the Demon Lord, and tell Abel that a war for territory between humans breaks out instead, and lasts for over 100 years. Disappointed, the Grand Magician listens as the Ice Queen talks about the people who form a group called AMO, who follow their anti-magic ideology, and burn ancient magic books all around the world. Abel wonders why people are keeping that incident in the dark, so the Ice Queen expounds the influence that AMO holds that makes the burning incident a taboo to talk about. The Grand Magician realizes that it is the main reason for the magic's decline, rather than the regalias. Eventually, Noel declares their group's purpose of learning about the magic that existed in ancient times, and to her surprise, Abel is not laughing or making fun of her strange idea. The Ice Queen is confused because people find magic tools convenient compared to ancient magic, making it the reason why the majority is giving her the cold shoulder. Therefore, Abel assures the Ice Queen that he finds her incredible, but because of that, Noel blushes as she asks the amber-eyed magician's name. As Abel introduces himself, the Ice Queen repeats his name and gives him a spare key, along with an invitation to come back again tomorrow. Despite initially planning to take a look once, Abel accepts the key, but while that's happening, the red-eyed lady feels the presence of another love rival. The following day, the class eventually ends, but the exhausted young noble is already leaving as he informs his mentor of the research groups he desperately needs to attend. On the other hand, the Grand Magician is now on his way to visit Noel as promised, but his attention shifts to Eliza, who asks for a bit of his time. Confused, the former hero asks what she wants, so the young maiden reveals her question of wondering what study group Abel is going to join. The undecided student informs her that he's still undecided, so the red-eyed lady tells him about a research group she is interested in joining and invites Abel to go together. Curious, the former hero reads the recruitment paper of the Dragon Rider research group and accepts Eliza's invitation, making her delighted as she heads to the dormitory with a satisfied face. As a result, the amber-eyed magician goes to fulfill his promise of visiting Noel's research group. But as he walks into the dark hall, Abel stops after noticing the familiar presence of the genius teacher, who smiles and treats this as mere coincidence. The student worries that he is being observed again, so Emerson reveals he is the advisor of the ancient research group and has just finished visiting Noel. Based on the current situation, the teacher asks the Grand Magician if he is finally interested in the Ice Queen's existence, and proceeds to inform him that Noel is an exceptional student who is so strong that the teachers exempt her from their classes. In addition, Emerson reveals that it allows her to focus on studying ancient magic. However, the fellow genius is aware that Noel, deep inside, wants someone of her level to be a friend. Amused, Emerson remembers that Abel is stronger than the Ice Queen, so he offers him a helping hand to be exempted in classes. But the former hero immediately rejects his proposal as he doesn't want his peaceful school life to be hindered. Speechless, the unsurprised instructor lets Abel go, but his sinister smile reveals that getting involved with Noel will make it difficult for his goal. Eventually, the Grand Magician enters the library, where the Ice Queen immediately welcomes the newcomer like a puppy waiting for her master. Excited, Noel doesn't waste time and shows Abel an ancient book she brings from home, who mysteriously recognizes the tome the Ice Queen introduces as her family heirloom, the Akashic Records. The former hero is shocked at the existence of the legendary book that contains all the magic in the world, and asks Noel her reason for bringing a disastrous thing inside the academy, but then learns that his request is the trigger. Abel realizes that Noel may be a high nobility for having such a legendary book, so he asks the Ice Queen if he can look at its contents. Surprisingly, Noel doesn't hesitate to magically open the Akashic Records and hands it to the Grand Magician, who feels nervous as he opens the cursed magic book, although finding out that it's already been burned in some places. Suddenly, the Grand Magician realizes that only he can create an advanced book even 200 years ago, and finds out that it is dedicated to a woman named Daytona. Immediately, the former hero asks Noel if she inherited the tome from his ancestors, and the Ice Queen confirms his assumption, despite wondering how Abel knows it. Suddenly, the Grand Magician goes down memory lane, where he and his companion, named Daytona, meet again after a few days after defeating the Demon Lord to give the book his fellow hero requested. Even so, Abel still asks why a blue-eyed like her wants a magic guide for black and gray-eyed magicians. Daytona smiles and explains her desire of wanting a book from the greatest magician, but eventually reveals that she'll sell it for money, forcing Abel to remember that Daytona is a former merchant herself. In spite of that, the Grand Magician still doesn't mind, so the woman asks for an autograph only to get teased by Abel, who writes her name instead. Finally, the reminiscing ends, but the former hero realizes that Daytona must have struggled to recover the book, which becomes a trigger of another war. Unfortunately, the Ice Queen sees his strange reaction, which leads Abel to assume that she notices his real identity, only to find out her amazement at him being able to read the Akashic Records. Therefore, he teaches the young girl about the book's contents, and makes Noel more curious as she asks the amber-eyed mage to tell more about it. Unfortunately, Abel refuses her plea, but tells the prodigy that he'll do it some other time, making Daytona's descendant feel happy about another promise. However, the following day is not pleasing for not just Abel, but also Eliza, who can't contain their disappointment at the strangely lively mood of the seniors in the Dragon Rider research group the two visit after class. The flirty appearance of the young men disappoints the former hero, who knows that taking care of a dragon was an exhausting job 200 years ago. Unsurprisingly, even Eliza suffers from a tremendous shock as she apologizes to Abel for bringing him along. But a fellow newcomer suddenly asks about the difference of their research group compared to the actual Dragon Rider team. Without hesitation, the upperclassman declares that their main goal is to have fun, and no challenges will befall anyone, even if they can't ride a dragon. Therefore, the leader urges the first-year students to form a partner with one of the seniors. But while everyone has created their group, Eliza and Abel are left with only the two of them. The Grand Magician can't endure his headache anymore, but the senior adds up to that as he invites Eliza to be his partner. The red-eyed lady informs him about her companion, but the haughty leader tells her that it's impossible to bring the guy along on their flight, and pressures Eliza to accept his invitation to ride a dragon together. Oblivious of her feelings, Abel urges his classmate to have fun on her own with the senior, but that statement enrages the red-eyed girl instead, so she eventually goes with the upperclassmen in the end. However, the group leader sinisterly smiles as he orders a member to lend Abel a dragon. Finally, the senior presents Saint Glory, the beast he owns, which excites Eliza while catching the former hero's interest. To Abel's surprise, the group leader permits him to choose his own dragon, while he, on the other hand, informs Eliza that they'll depart. Despite being reluctant, the red-eyed lady decides just to go as she part ways with Abel, who gets called by the caretaker of dragons, Pepe Euler, who we will call Pepe. Immediately, the Grand Magician realizes that Pepe is the one who is really devoted to taking care of the dragons. However, that same guy advises him not to choose a certain beast in the cage. Troubled, the caretaker decides to show the reasons directly as he brings Abel into the presence of Leonhard, whose nickname will be Leo, a strong and powerful dragon in the middle of his slumber. The former hero notices the strength of the beast, but Pepe reveals that Leo is not impressive anymore compared to he was a famous racing dragon in the past. In addition, the caretaker tells Abel about the havoc Leo causes by not listening to anyone anymore. However, the Grand Magician knows that the prideful beast just hates to follow those weaker than him, leading Abel to order Leo to wake up despite Pepe's warning. Unfortunately, the dragon simply returns to his sleep. But the amber-eyed magician is not yet over, as he now uses magic to force Leo to obey his command. The mighty beast immediately wakes up and releases a loud roar that amazes Pepe after seeing the motivated Leo for the first time. Surprised, he asks Abel who in the world he is, but the dragon tamer who is now riding the beast declares that he's just an ordinary student. While that's happening, Saint Glory flies in the sky and lets the red-eyed girl enjoy the beautiful scene from above, if only she's not regretting not having Abel as a riding partner. The senior notices the girl's concerns and invites her to rest on the rocks near their location, where he gives Eliza some food to gobble to pass the time. The young maiden unquestionably grabs the snack, but the blurriness of her vision starts as her body loses its strength while the upperclassman smiles. To Eliza's surprise, the leader reveals the stimulant that he puts on the food, which also weakens the mage's fireball as it easily gets defended by the vicious student. The senior continues his mad laugh as he evades the magic spells Eliza is throwing at him, and once again shows a scary smile and suddenly goes on top of the young maiden, grabbing her hair. Unfortunately, Abel's location will make it difficult to save Eliza. The story continues with the leecher progressing his degeneracy schemes to Eliza, while scaring the hell out of the girl by saying the possibility of Abel meeting his demise by the prideful dragon he's riding. Therefore, the upperclassman harasses the helpless genius until an enormous beast kicks him out of the way, regaining Eliza's hope as it is Abel and Leo who arrive in the nick of time to save her. The Grand Magician reveals seeing the genius's fireballs, so he treats them as SOS signals and comes to the place. But this scene is too disappointing for Abel, especially after seeing the pervert in distress and wanting to get revenge. The Grand Magician is still calm though and tells his anger issues senpai not to resort to violence on this mountain, which is supposed to be a peaceful place. Obviously, the guy doesn't understand a wee bit of what he's saying, and instead shows his all-powerful regalia to cast windblade bullets at his newly sworn enemy. Abel dodges all of them with a swift maneuver and heats straight to his upperclassman, greeting him with a flying kick to send his regalia to the depths of the cliff. Goodbye. But while the perv is still in the middle of processing his thoughts, Abel notices that the target of the wind bullets isn't him all along. Eventually, Eliza realizes that too, when she sees Saint Glory on his way to bulldoze the Grand Magician, immediately warning him of the approaching threat that their senpai is just laughing at, as he signaled him earlier to come. As the dragon approaches, Abel enchants his body with numerous strengthening buffs and simply touches Saint Glory's forehead with a single finger, stopping the mythical beast in its tracks to overpower him. Of course, the pitiful senpai can't stop yammering while ordering the dragon to continue obliterating the Grand Magician. But even Saint Glory has question marks on his head until he hears Abel's intimidating command to stop his foolish plans. Afterward, the magician tells the plus-size lizard to take his master away and leave the place so as not to have his life taken. As a result, Saint Glory lets out a cute noise, unbefitting his reputation as a prideful dragon, and panics while rushing to the upper-class man, dragging him away from the calamity known as Abel, not even caring that he's carrying the perv like a cargo and a noisy one that, after tending to Eliza's needs, Abel rides Leo once more, this time accompanied by Eliza, who seems to enjoy the sunset and the quickness of the dragon. Suddenly, the Grand Magician catches sight of the other club members and finds out that it is only the thirsty guy earlier who gave his partner a stimulant. In the middle of their flight, however, Eliza blushes as she tells Abel her wish for the time to stop. Unfortunately, the dense Grand Magician treats the girl's words literally, thinking that time-stop magic should be possible in 5 or whatever years. Eventually, Eliza embraces Abel from behind and furthers the things that should cause a misunderstanding. Well, romantically, if only the Grand Magician is not as dense to ignore it, and informs the red-eyed genius about a certain study group instead. A few minutes after the dragon ride, Abel brings Eliza along to the ancient magic research club room and opens the door using the keystone. The clueless lady is surprised, but still enters it with the Grand Magician, who finally introduces the place to Eliza. That is interrupted, however, by the sole official member, who immediately greets the former hero with all cheerfulness until she sees Eliza, leading not just her but also the red-eyed lady, to let out a noise of disappointment. Despite their displeasure, the two reveal seeing each other often in the past due to their parents being friends. Abel immediately realizes it must be because the ancestors of these two are the fire and water heroes, and is actually amazed that the descendants of his former companions are in the same school as him. He doesn't waste more time, though, and tells Noel about his request to let Eliza join the club, which she instantly agrees as it is the decision of the Grand Magician. However, the Ice Queen has one condition as she tells Abel to put his attention on her, rather than the red-eyed love rival. As usual, Abel proves that he really is dense because he thinks Noel is referring to the lessons despite the obvious skinship she's showing. On the other hand, Eliza feels jealous at their abrupt hand-holding, but Noel must also be a queen of making others envious, as she just shows her superiority and closeness by clinging to Abel's arm. Unfortunately, the Grand Magician still thinks it's all about learning and the Akashic records, but while he's like that, Eliza finally strikes and links her arms to Abel's, while engaging in a rivalry war against the famous Ice Queen. However, their showdown is interrupted when Abel casts an attack spell after noticing the demonic spider spying on them. The arachnid immediately falls in one hit, and Eliza sees it's a rare species in the area. But the Grand Magician has a different realization as he concludes that the spider is a demon's familiar. In spite of the situation, Noel continues clinging to Abel, and seems like she will not let him go anytime soon. Meanwhile, on the school grounds, we can see the exhausted Ted contemplating what club to join after his grand tour of visiting almost all of them. All of a sudden, he notices someone's presence and sees that it is his brother, Bass, who is hiding behind a tree, even though he should be absent due to sickness. The older brother pays no mind to Ted's concerns and just invites him to join the Magic Eradication Club, which he is a member of. But the younger sibling is confused as to what that group is about, leading Bass to turn into a madman and explains to her brother that they are a group who seeks to return the world order by eradicating the existence known as magic. Without hesitation, Ted refuses his nonsense and reveals that he's being trained by his master, but that enrages Bass even more as he realizes that the mentor is Abel, who he hates to the very core. As a result, Bass pushes him down and asks the whereabouts of his sworn enemy, but Ted also has no idea where Abel is, as they haven't seen each other after school recently. Therefore, he points out his older brother's bad complexion instead, but as if Bass will feel happy from his concerns when, in reality, the madman becomes more enraged and yells at his younger brother to shut up. Suddenly, spider legs start to form in Bass's body as he lets out a mad laugh, befitting his terrifying appearance. Faced with his brother's horrifying transformation, Ted can't help but fear the new form of Bass's rebirth as an arachnid human. Class continues as usual the next day, but the unchanging, boring lessons also go on for the Grand Magician. However, he notices that Ted hasn't attended class since morning, which makes him worried, knowing that his apprentice will not skip school without telling someone. Consequently, Abel interrupts the lesson by telling their instructor that he's not feeling well, but the teacher sees that as an opportunity to get back at him, so he refuses the Grand Magician's request without an ounce of hesitation. Unbeknownst to the teacher, his response triggers Abel to resort to violence in the form of a malicious intent directed at him. The professor spins around in dizziness, unaware of what's really happening, as he curls up on the ground, terrified. Afterward, Abel asks what he's feeling, so the professor, who desperately gets up, informs the class about the headache and whatever it is he's suffering from, and tells them that today's lesson is suspended. Unfortunately, the instructor still has a long way to go before he can do his business, but as soon as he leaves, Abel starts walking away from the classroom and tells his worried classmates, mainly girls, that he'll feel okay after a short rest. It is a bluff, however, because the perfectly fine Grand Magician heads to Ted's room to check on his state. However, seeing that no one's there leads him to remember their conversation yesterday about Ted's multiple club tours, concluding that the boy hasn't returned since he dropped his stuff after school. Eventually, he's getting worried that Ted gets caught up in another trouble, forcing him to cast a wide-scale searching magic, enveloping the entire academy. Thanks to that, Abel finds his apprentice hanging on a tree with spider's thread covering his whole body. Therefore, the Grand Magician immediately cuts them with wind magic and frees Ted with the magically enhanced shackles binding him. The boy then reveals their underlying problem by informing his mentor about the monster possessing his brother, saying that spider legs have grown on its back and affect Bass's mental state. However, this revelation rings a bell to the Grand Magician, who immediately starts rushing somewhere after advising Ted to go to the infirmary and let them check his state. Powerless, the young noble can only beg his mentor to help Bass, so Abel rushes to the location where Ted's brother is likely to be. The story then brings us to Noel, who is patiently waiting for Abel in the club room, smiling excitedly when she finally hears the door opening. Unfortunately, the man who greets her sight is not the Grand Magician, but the member of the Magic Eradication Club, who obviously has something evil in mind as he confirms that the lady in front of him is the Ice Queen. Bass doesn't have much interest in her, however, and simply pushes Noel away and heads straight to the plethora of books, where he once again lets a sinister laugh as the information a certain person tells him about this library is correct. Like the madman he is, Bass shifts his attention to Noel and yells at him for keeping the tomes, which for him are tools of war, and uses his regalia to cast magic to shred all of them into pieces. The sudden turn of events baffles the Ice Queen, but she refuses to let this continue any further, causing her to shower Bass and his magic spell with a storm, which turns them into ice. Except that Noel realizes the enemy disappears before getting hit. Suddenly, she hears a demonic voice coming from the ceiling and sees the former human becoming a complete arachnid to take Noel down along with her beloved library. At a tremendous speed, Bass charges toward the Ice Queen, only to get hit by something that even Noel has no idea what. Even so, the fact remains that the enormous spider is now lying on the ground due to an ice needle pierced at his body. So Noel is finally relieved that she's safe for the time being. It's a surprise for her, though, that Abel is the one who arrives for her rescue, but the Grand Magician knows that their predicament hasn't ended yet, specifically because their enemy is still moving. Moreover, this 8-legged beast feels excited to see the peasant from his childhood, but the plebeian he's talking to isn't a bit fazed, and even concludes that Bass becomes a demon's follower. Therefore, Abel points out the guy's unhealthy look, but it seems like this spider has an inferiority complex regarding his appearance as his rage escalates once again, like what happened with Ted. However, Bass's speed is no joke as he bounces to the walls, creating after-images to confuse the amber-eyed magician as to which one of them to hit. Commencing his attack, Bass blames Abel for the unhappy life he currently has, but even though the Grand Magician agrees to those words, in the end, it boils down to this spider's self-responsibility. Finally, Bass charges toward Abel with the hopes of taking him down, but the amber-eyed magician counterattacks with ice needles that incapacitate the enormous spider. He then takes out his sword and walks closer to the beast, while telling Noel his plan to take Bass's life, not wasting time. Abel threatens to end this once and for all with his sharpened blade, but the Ice Queen immediately stops him from doing so with a sudden embrace. The amber-eyed mage obviously urges her to let go, but the Ice Queen refuses as she doesn't want to let her friend turn into a manslayer because of this incident. However, those words trigger Abel's old memories of a man who seems to be a scientist patting his head and telling him that sacrifices are needed for magic development. The flashback is short-lived, but it is enough to force the former hero to continue his initial plan to eliminate the demon's minion. Ignoring Bass's screams, Abel thrusts his sword and pierces Bass, thus sending the guy's demonic and original soul into nothingness. Even though their enemy has been defeated, Noel has such a crying face, so Abel shows the next phase of his plan by healing the wounds of the lifeless demon's follower. The dazzling light blinds the Ice Queen, but it fails to stop her from seeing the reviving spell Abel casts at Ted's brother, enabling Noel to witness the resurrection magic that the Grand Magician invented 200 years ago. The Ice Queen feels both amazed and in disbelief of what's occurring in front of her eyes, but Abel, on the other hand, stops the girl from asking questions, as he still needs to bring Bass to the infirmary. Furthermore, Abel emphasizes he'll be the one to report this incident before leaving the classroom, carrying the human spider in his back. The night after the incident, we can see the Grand Magician just finished informing Lilith about the situation, but she already concludes that the mastermind is a demon who is also the head of a branch of AMO, Nabil. Abel is impressed by the demon princess's information network, but he's still in the dark as to why Nabil is associated with the anti-magic organization. Therefore, Lilith reveals that the weird group is so convenient for the demons who are now divided into two factions, the moderates, who will coexist with the humans, and the reformers, who seek the opposite. In spite of those conquerors' existence, Abel and Lilith believe that not all demons emit hostility against humans, so they won't discriminate against them. However, the demon princess's rage still remains as she moves on to think how they'll deal with Bass's punishment. Abel reveals that he became a test subject for his memory alteration magic, which he casts on Bass to alter his memories 10 days prior to the incident. Moreover, he advises Lilith not to lay her hands on the young noble, saying he still has some use to him, but this demon princess is so amused that she's not buying the remarks of this tender-hearted magician. Suddenly, Lilith goes on top of Abel and expresses her love to the boy's tender lips. Thus, a soft, passionate night begins. Morning arrives along with the return of the cheerful Ted, greeting his mentor a perfect morning before thanking him for saving Bass yesterday. The boy then reveals that his brother will be fine, according to the doctor. But Ted is confused as to why Bass has no memories of the incident. Without mentioning he's the cause, Abel assures his apprentice that Bass will be treated favorably thanks to Lilith, who makes it seem like Ted's brother is just a victim. The Grand Magician advises him not to go near Amo, though as there's a possibility he'll become their ensy-weensy spider and be crushed. Afterward, in the ancient magic research club lies, in wait, the Ice Queen, who, as usual, is reading books when the Grand Magician arrives. Unfortunately, Abel notices the decrease of the items in the library due to the incident and the behavior change of Noel, who's not excited to talk with him, unlike usual. That will end, however, when she finally opens up a conversation about the Akashic records and points out the resurrection magic, which is supposed to be impossible to read in one page due to the burn marks occupying it. But before she can say the most awaited question, Abel cuts her words short and asks Noel if she'll believe it if he's the writer of Akashic records. Of course, the Ice Queen is dumbfounded after hearing that and becomes unable to process her thoughts quickly to give the amber-eyed mage an immediate answer. When he notices that, Abel tells Noel to ignore what he just said and think of the reincarnation magic yesterday as a mere coincidence. Therefore, the Grand Magician teaches the Ice Queen a way to deduce the book's burned contents simply by focusing on the following paragraphs, backing up his flimsy pretense while keeping some thoughts in his mind not to reveal his secret again anytime soon. An unknown number of days after that, Ted's most awaited occasion arrives, so he invites his mentor to the cafeteria, as it will be their priority day as first-year students. Without further ado, the two head to their location, where they see the food-obsessed individuals lining up for food. Ted is one of them, however, as he joins their patient hunt while leaving the Grand Magician, who just wants to line somewhere that doesn't have a long queue. As a result, Eliza sees him and is quite surprised that this boy, who eats only bread, is lining up for a real meal, quite rarely. Consequently, Eliza brags she'll be going to gobble the hidden menu of thick sliced bacon and spinach cream pasta, and shows the premium member card of the school cafeteria, of course, with a smug and prideful face. A few minutes after that, Abel finally gets the kitsune udon, which he's been waiting for out of curiosity, but he seems to be a wee bit disappointed that the meat is not fox, as the name suggests. On another note, Eliza is worried about the crowded place, but that doesn't make much sense to the Grand Magician, who instantly spots empty seats for them. He goes in almost immediately, but stops after hearing the sudden warnings coming from his red-eyed classmate. Abel's confusion is immediately answered by a bunch of lackeys scolding him for attempting to take the reserved seat for their master, Sibane Redstar. But the amber-eyed mage isn't the slightest concerned, meaning there's no such thing as reserved seats in this cafeteria. Fortunately, Sibane Redstar, who we will call Redstar, forgives Abel and lets him go, so Eliza urges him to find another seat as their opponent, this time the son of a duke. The udon, which is getting cold, is Abel's priority, though, because he orders Redstar's group to find other seats instead. The Duke's son doesn't like the rumored amber-eyed commoner's response and asks his flunkies to punish the insolent plebeian, but as if these arrogant weaklings can defeat the former hero when they easily get caught by a small tornado, Abel casts. Consequently, the lackeys trip and kiss the floor at the same time with their shoelaces suddenly untied. While Redstar thinks it's just a coincidence, Eliza finally interrupts to tell him it's not because Abel hasn't spilled a drop of udon since their fight. Redstar's face screams, "Wow," after hearing that, but it quickly changes into one of a spoiled kid throwing tantrums as he runs away with his tails between his legs, declaring his revenge in the final exam. Thanks to that, a sudden sneeze befalls Mars as Abel compares the event to the one they had in the past. But a bigger problem lingers now that the Grand Magician is wondering about Redstar's words, the final exam. Meanwhile, Phidia stays in the faculty room and just finished sorting the questions for the upcoming test, except for one subject. Therefore, she reports it to the headmaster, who then appreciates her efforts as they wait for the test papers for the magical engineering test that Emerson is working so hard for. His out-of-character expression is baffling for Phidia, though, as she's wondering what kind of exam this man is doing with that kind of face. Amused, Michael assumes it must be because of the rival this genius teacher has found, and it's right on the mark, as Emerson is already looking mentally ill with his desire to fight Abel again using this exam. The story then brings us to the Grand Magician walking in the hallway, while reminiscing his fight with the Demon Lord of Dusk due to the rainy season in his area. As a result, Abel realizes the changes in these past 200 years, and is quite pleased by it as he then reaches the club room of their group. Rushing to the door, Noel greets the Grand Magician while presenting her new outfit that is absolutely worthy of praise. As soon as she gets a rather plain compliment, the Ice Queen shows a captivating smile, which, unfortunately, makes her look like a puppy for this amber-eyed, dense magician. However, Abel's attention shifts to the sobbing figure of Eliza, who's complaining about the vast information she needs to memorize for the exam. Although this red-eyed prodigy is still on the safe side, the opposite can definitely be said for Ted, who's wallowing himself in chocolatey dreams, unlike Abel, who mercilessly reveals that there's no need for him to study for the exam. Moreover, Noel has the same opinion as her amber-eyed crush, leading Ted to associate Eliza with a group of ordinary people the same as him. Once again, the Ice Queen agrees, because it turns out that Ted has tailed Eliza successfully to reach their secret library. Eventually, Abel asks his apprentice if he'll do well on exams, but the obvious fact surfaces even more, as Ted reveals his fear of failing because of the rumors that 10% of students drop out every year due to these notorious tests. He even made calculations to determine how many out of 200 students would survive in the end, but even his math is wrong, and Abel refuses to help him study this time around. On his way home with Eliza, the Grand Magician eventually becomes worried that his student will fail, so he decides to lend a hand. Going to the dormitory in the middle of the rainfall takes priority, though, but someone has accidentally taken Abel's umbrella at a perfectly great time, for Eliza, that is, as she grabs the opportunity to offer her umbrella to the young man she likes. This lady is already blushing when she opens it and gives it to Abel as thanks for his help so far. But Abel is really a great magician, as he showcases it by casting a rain cover spell as if slapping Eliza's face with the fact that her actions are unnecessary. How brutal. In the middle of their exchange, Abel hears Red Star's lackey getting his attention just to show him the missing umbrella they stole. Furthermore, he makes a mess out of it and continues the nonsense low-level prank, which irritates Eliza to the point that she's close to punishing those flunkies, if only Abel doesn't stop her. The haughty students continue to mock the amber-eyed commoner, whom they call the Knight due to his heroism, but their taunts are ineffective to the Grand Magician, who senses something strange and uses his analytical eyes to discover the camcorder regalia to record his violence the moment he fights back using force. Unfortunately for them, Abel casts a water spell instead to strengthen the rain and showers them with a large splash of water, spinning the group along with the whirlpool to drive them away. Despite his impressive magic, the Grand Mage still makes a blunder as he accidentally sends the umbrella along with his victims. Unfortunately, Eliza offers hers again as gratitude for earlier, while doing another needless action of running toward the dormitory amidst the intense rainfall. Therefore, Abel is forced to share the umbrella with the young maiden in love after the realization that using magic all the time is not a good idea. In reality, Abel just wants to be protected by the comforting umbrella, but there's no way he can say it out loud. Thus, the love, delusions, and misunderstanding of the red-eyed lady soar high. A few days have passed and the exam is drawing near, but Eliza is strangely relaxed, unlike her reactions the other day. As a result, Abel surprises her with a question about that, and finds out she's already finished, unlike Ted, who's just sleeping his way to escape the harsh reality. Moreover, they find out that the pitiful guy is stuck in the beginning parts, so Eliza urges the Grand Magician to help the apprentice in distress to avoid the tragedy of his grades becoming bad. Abel realizes he won't be able to use Ted as a scapegoat anymore if that happens, so he decides to give a bit of his helping hand by writing the questions that may possibly be included in the exam. Thanks to the professor's awful hobby of immediately erasing the important lessons, Abel is able to predict what the contents of the test will be, so he hands the notebook with the pointers to the young noble. Unfortunately, there's no telling if Ted is still alive at this point, as there's no yay or any signs of cheerfulness coming from him. As a result, Eliza changes the topic and asks Abel about his plans for the upcoming summer vacation. Abel is aware that Ted is slowly coming back to life as he listens to their conversation. The red-eyed genius then invites Abel to go to the beach, but even though her invitation is too abrupt for the Grand Mage, the Ice Queen thinks of it differently, and even admits that it's a brilliant idea coming from her rival. Eventually, the two are straying out of the norm by talking like they're good friends thanks to the beach, even though they're originally polar opposites. Due to Abel's financial concerns, Noel reveals her grand plan to call their trip a training camp to get some funds from the school. Therefore, they discuss who will be the teacher to accompany them. But the sudden resurrection of the lifeless Ted puts them to a halt, as he is now brimming with motivation not to take the test, but to enjoy the sea after the infamous exams are finished. Eventually, the nerve-wracking day arrives, so the teacher hands the answer sheets to the students, accompanied by a warning that suspicious actions will instantly lead to their disqualification. Finally, their signal to answer rings, so Abel starts skimming through the test papers and decides to manipulate his scores to only 80% to avoid getting more unnecessary attention than he already possesses. Hours have passed since then, and the final phase, which is the magical engineering test, officially begins. But Abel notices that the questions are much easier than the ones back from the entrance exams. It's still too early to celebrate, though, because the final boss finally greets the former hero in the form of the most difficult question made by none other than Emerson. Noticing it's a direct challenge coming from the genius instructor, Abel decides not to treat it so seriously and stick to the original plan of 80%. That concludes the Grand Magician and his Apprentices Academy exam arc, as it is now the day to see their ranking and test results on the board. Fortunately, Ted manages to avoid supplementary lessons by getting the bare minimum score, making him so excited he'll be able to join the training camp. There's one more person who also feels excited, though, as Red Star shows himself to humiliate Abel as he promised. Immediately, the two engage in dialogues showing their displeasure, but the Duke's son already wins when it comes to haughtiness, as he teaches Abel the known fact that no external students have made it to the top 5 in the past 10 years. Heck, Red Star even shows a cringe pose while saying that. So the surprise on his face is really immeasurable after seeing the over 500,000 points of his enemy who ranks first place. Even Eliza and Yukari have made it as the 3rd and 4th. So the Duke's son, who only placed 5th, can't help but complain and calls Abel's 6-digit points cheating. Consequently, Fadia declares there's no foul play, and warns Red Star not to associate Abel's amber-colored eyes with his destined failure, which is not happening anyway. So what's more fun to do than running away like a spoiled brat? Ignoring that, Fadia hands the ranked 1 student a letter from Emerson, but their hands accidentally touching turns the professor into a stuttering red-faced as she tells the students to enter their classrooms, hiding her embarrassment. Unfortunately, the letter just worsens Abel's mood now that he finds out that Emerson is the culprit of his absurd score, all because this grand mage easily answers his challenging question. In the same place where the announcement boards are, Bass finds out he placed 52nd and seems to be pretty satisfied by it, as all he cares about is his duties as an AMO member. On his way to leave, Bass gets stopped by Nabal to ask about the progress of his mission, telling him that he's not reporting anything about the library's arson yet. Bass has no idea what this secret mission is, but Nabal thinks he's just feigning ignorance, leading him to touch the follower's forehead as if reading his mind, only to panic after knowing Bass's mental and physical state. Therefore, the demon wonders how this young noble overcame his curse and goes hysterical when asking about it. But Bass has zero memory regarding the demonic powers and thinks it's the first time he has met this AMO branch chief. Nabal realizes that Bass is not lying and the disappearance of the power he has bestowed, so he walks away from his follower, harboring the thought that an unknown existence in this academy is becoming a threat to their organization, and plans to pluck out whoever it is from the world. When night arrives, we can see Abel in his room in the dormitory packing things for the 60 days of summer vacation, which for him is too long. Suddenly, Lilith barges in to inform the Grand Magician about Nabal and Bass's meeting earlier, and tells Abel that they successfully found the enemy hideout. Thanks to that. After giving the documents of her findings, Lilith asks her master if there's anything else she can do to help, but the Grand Mage fancies a me time, so he asks the Demon Princess for another favor instead. Lilith is dumbfounded, however, when she hears Abel's request to accompany their group in their upcoming training camp, as they need a teacher with them to have permission for their pretense and the funds. Because of Lilith's concerns about their club advisor going with them, Abel reveals that Emerson is too busy after neglecting his research for the government, mainly because he wasted his efforts by creating the exam questions. Therefore, the Grand Magician invites her again to their little trip, but the Demon Princess's reaction is so confusing that Abel asks about it, but learns that Lilith is just surprised that Abel is going out of character to ask a favor for somebody else's sake. With that, Lilith declares that her master has changed, but that fact is so obvious that Abel thinks there's no need to even mention it. Therefore, he wonders if she's unhappy about this change, but that's impossible for this who leans closer to her master, letting him sniff the familiar sweet scent that signals the start of a blurry yet passionate night between the two. The next day, in the nightless city of Parakanos, Eliza is in her casual dress waiting for someone when two wild nobodies appear to invite her to hang out with them. In response to their invitation, Eliza casts a fireball to drive those chickens away, and successfully gets the amazement of her fellow girls in the process. Not too long after that, Yukari finally arrives in an outfit that is too strange for her friend, so she explains that wearing Japanese clothing is actually an order from her mother every time she goes outside. Despite thinking that a what-to-wear rule sounds very strict, Eliza compliments Yukari's appearance.
Hence, she receives a sudden hug as they link arms on their way to their destination. Of course, summer vacation means swimsuits for these ladies, so as soon as they reach the store, Eliza immediately tries an outfit, wondering if Abel will like it. She feels so troubled though and decides to just ask her friend's opinion. But Yukari's reaction is so dazzling that hearts are forming in her eyes and mouth. Excited, the girl takes countless pictures of the red-eyed prodigy while going out of character and admires her friend's voluptuous body. Still, Eliza can't help but feel something is lacking in the swimsuit she has tried, leading her to ask Yukari's opinions on the types that Abel will like, thinking that Abel is too passive to even think of Eliza as a member of the opposite sex. Yukari recommends getting one from the provocative collection, making the young maiden in love fired up in preparation for a swimsuit battle. Immediately, she tries one and shows it to Yukari, who is already close to drooling while complimenting the destructive combination of the girl's figure and new outfit. As a result, Eliza decides to settle on her last choices and wishes to attract even a wee bit of attention from Abel despite the low chances. When she finishes changing, Eliza urges her companion to buy a swimsuit too, but the girl who's too elated earlier refuses to wear what she calls indecent clothes. Afterward, the two continue their little date by going into the cafe and eating until the red-eyed glutton becomes full. Yukari warns her to be careful though because it may hinder her upcoming attempt to catch Abel's attention using the swimsuit plan, so Eliza panics, and it's hard to tell if her upcoming diet will bear fruit after this. Eventually, the two leave the cafe when it's already dark outside, leading them to see the other side of the nightless city. As a result, the ladies head to the capital, but Yukari suddenly bumps into a stranger who seems like they did it deliberately to corner these young ladies. After all, they invite the two to a certain job that pays really well. But of course, Eliza refuses their fishy offer and leaves while slapping the filthy hand of the man who tried to touch her. Turns out the degenerate is one hell of an actor, as he pretends to have a fractured bone to provoke the young student into an argument. Unfortunately, these strangers show their blades to threaten the two's lives if they refuse to come with them quietly. However, Eliza won't give in that easily, so she gives the shopping bag to Yukari and calms herself down, knowing it is what Abel will do in this kind of situation. The red-eyed lady throws a flame edge toward them, but hits the trash can first as a warning shot, yet still fails to scare the hell out of these two men, who become more eager to abduct them instead. Finally, there's no choice but to punish these pervs with her full power, but a meteor-like spell appears in the night sky and interrupts their exchange as it hits a building, causing an explosion to occur that surprises not just the suspicious men, but also their targeted prey. However, the dumb one with glasses assumes that the incident is Eliza's doing, so he sprints away from the red-eyed lady, along with his companion, while begging for forgiveness. Little do they know, Eliza and Yukari are also not sure who caused the magic explosion in the middle of Parakinos. The story goes back in time 1 hour ago when Abel visits the alleyways of the city wearing a mask, which still seems questionable if he really has intentions to hide his identity. Putting aside the mage's appearance, Abel's goal in this night raid is to confront Nabil in his secret hideout, so he enters the tall building with a flimsy magic lock as their security. The Grand Magician doesn't even go for a grandiose entrance and hurriedly splits the enemies' heads from their bodies, remembering Lilith's advice not to show mercy for Nabil's followers, as they are already rotten to their very core. Following those words, Abel continues playing his slitting game to another guard who blocks his way, but it happens so suddenly that the enemy's companion has no choice but to beg for his life, while resorting to playing the family card by saying he has a young daughter waiting for him. Abel also seems to believe that there's nothing stronger than family, but the demon obviously has vicious plans as he sneaks an attack using the demonic tail on his back to catch the intruder off guard. Abel notices his evil plan thanks to his smirk and devilish laugh, which is confident of its victory, enabling the former hero to stop the demon's venomous tail from piercing him. Leaving a baffled look at the enemy, Abel blames himself for showing a bit of sympathy, and becomes more enraged as he turns the demon to ice, starting from the tail all the way to his body, and he can do nothing but scream until there's no voice left. Finally, Abel realizes that his naivety may be what Lilith is referring to about his change, as he isn't originally someone who listens to the enemy's pleas. This time will be different, however, as Abel turns a little bit serious and chops the enemy's heads with a single swift movement. The Grand Magician forces himself to recall his hellish experiences 200 years ago, where he even takes the life of a man he loved to gain freedom. Presently, numerous remains scatter around him as he proceeds to open the magical lock in hopes that Nabiel is still inside. Unfortunately, the AMO branch leader has already escaped by jumping out from the building, but the former hero is not yet finished, and casts numerous enchants on his body. It's a mere fraction of a millisecond, but Abel quickly shoots a magical arrow to Nabiel, who is swinging around the city to escape using his threads. After the explosion, it would seem like this spider has a long way to go to improve his senses, or else this Grand Magician will make a plaything out of him for a while. Unfortunately, the same goes for Abel, who, on the other hand, needs to work on the naivety that has developed in this peaceful world. A few days after that eventful night, Ted and Abel are in the Eastern District for their most awaited training camp. The two don't even wait for too long to witness the magic train, which makes them so excited, especially the young noble who is close to not being allowed to join their trip. However, his excitement is interrupted by the demon princess, who reminds him that studying is their main purpose, and definitely not entertainment like what this teacher's outfit is screaming. Eventually, Noel and Eliza arrive at the same time in their casual clothes, so their group is finally completed, and all that's left is to ride the convenient magical train that's already departing. Thus, after admiring the impressive transportation that, unfortunately for Ted, has no nitro engines, the group starts entering so as not to be left out of their trip. As the chattering and munching sounds echo inside the train, Lilith gives her little brother some home-baked cookies along with herb tea and continues pampering the Grand Mage. Therefore, it is inevitable for Eliza and Noel not to suspect something fishy between these two siblings. So Abel reminds the demon princess to be careful, as there's a high chance they'll find out that the siblings' pretense is total nonsense. Seems like it's all according to Lilith's plan, though, as she hugs Abel with a playful grin and tells the shocked teenagers that the two of them are genuine siblings. However, thanks to Lilith's unnecessary showing of her superiority, Eliza asks Ted if his mentor is saying nothing but the truth. Still, this young apprentice has really done his homework, because even after remembering Bass's frustrations about Lilith choosing her own brother over him, he guarantees Eliza and Noel that Abel and the teacher are, yes, family. Fortunately, this innocent kid has saved his master by a hair's breadth. But while they are talking, the train has finally exited the tunnel and a fantastic sea view welcomes the group. Unfortunately, the Grand Magician receives the short end of the stick once again as he's being stomped by his overly excited companions. Looks like he's the only one who's unamused though, because even Lilith is giggling as she watches her master. Eventually, they land on St. Rhea Island, which is mysteriously familiar to the former hero in spite of the first time he hears its name. Suddenly, Noel mentions that it's actually an island visited by the Great Four Heroes, leading Abel to remember that this is also the exact place that Roy has prepared as a gift for him, after banishing Abel from their group. Furthermore, the Grand Magician finds out that St. Rhea becomes famous as the Hero Island, unaware that defeating a single squid was what Abel and his group had done there in the past. While Lilith leads the group to their inn, the former hero catches sight of 4 statues and learns from the demon princess that it's the island's main landmark, the hero's statues, depicting the sculptures of Abel's former companions starting from Maria to the right, up to the hero of Ash Kane. The unsung savior has a face full of disappointment despite knowing that having no statues of him is for the better. But his apprentice, on the other hand, is surprised that Eliza and Noel are both descendants of heroes. Therefore, Ted assumes that there's also something special in his lineage, but as if that convenient thinking is true. Fortunately, he's still a student of the forgotten Grand Magician, although there's no way Abel will tell it to him at this rate. Without further ado, the group heads to their inn, unaware that a raven is spying on their every movement. Meanwhile, Nabal is still suffering from the wounds Abel has inflicted on him while watching his footage captured by the building's CCTV cameras. But despite how much he wants to get revenge, Nabal knows it won't be easy, as the enemy this time is someone who can manipulate all elements. Suddenly, the raven earlier shows up and turns into a partial human form, while giving the flash drive with all the information from their collaborators in the academy to her master. When he opens the file, however, Emerson's face can be seen in the form of a video, along with the data about the famous amber-eyed student who matches the features of the intruder in their secret hideout. The Raven Girl also informs Nabal that Abel's research group is staying on St. Rhea Island, and reveals that they're the ancient magic research group that is also their target because of the secret library. Finally, all the dots are connecting, starting from Bass's strange memory loss up to this mysterious boy who always visits the library, reliving the excitement of this old demon to crush his newfound enemy. After walking up the stairs, the group arrives at the inn, whose design is too peculiar yet impressive for these young people. Eventually, the innkeeper welcomes them to Amano Hakadate, the name of their Eastern-looking hotel, before leading them to their room. Eliza then invites them to the beach, but Abel has no plan to join them until he receives immense pressure from Lilith, who's hell-bent on forcing her master to come. Afterward, the receptionist guides the two boys to their respective rooms, which are surprisingly divided by gender, not what Abel would expect from the demon princess. Therefore, the Grand Magician invites Ted to head to the beach, but it turns out that his apprentice's luggage is full of books because he actually got a failing grade. With tears in his eyes, Ted urges his master to go without him, as he still needs to immerse himself in the supplementary lessons. As a result, the Grand Magician heads to the beach alone, while wearing the swimwear Lilith has prepared for him, and sees the Ice Queen, who deliberately gets his attention to show off her new outfit. Abel praises Noel for her pleasing to the eye swimsuit, but that's unfortunately interrupted by the red-eyed prodigy who arrives to steal not just the spotlight, but also a small victory against the Ice Queen. Unfortunately for them, the last boss, who's also the canon partner, makes way to present her provocative look, which seems illegal in the eyes of these teenagers. Of course, the two underdogs protest, but the instructor sees no problem in showing her figure to Abel, thanks to the pretense that they are mere siblings. For once, the love rivals agree on one thing: to invite their amber-eyed crush for a swim, despite the obvious reluctance coming from the Grand Mage. Surprisingly, Lilith refuses the invitation to go along with them, definitely not because she hates to babysit the two ladies. Consequently, Abel guides the two, especially Noel, to whom he teaches information about the beach, as it seems like it's her first time going into one. The opposite can be seen in Eliza, however, as she's already playing in the water and urges Abel to join her with Noel in their playful duel. Finally, the Grand Magician gives in to the pressure of the summer and decides to enjoy it. All of a sudden, Noel feels something touching her foot, so she immediately dives underwater without even letting the dumbfounded Eliza know it firsthand. After a short underwater exploration, the Ice Queen immediately returns and asks Abel about the unknown existence she captures in the sea, the red sea cucumber. She casts it away almost instantly, though, and throws it to Eliza, who screams bloody murder when the sea cucumber accidentally ventures into her uncharted bosom territory. In spite of the strangeness of the creature, Noel asks the Grand Mage to teach her more about the sea and its wildlife, and Abel knows that this persistent girl will not give up, so why not tell her about the things he learns from Noel's ancestor anyway? Therefore, Abel heads straight deep under the sea to look for a fitting subject for the Ice Queen's lectures, leading him to go into a full hunt and pierce a clueless fish with an ice needle. Returning to the surface, Abel introduces the prey he catches to the two interested bunch who also want to learn how to catch a fish, as the Grand Magician did. Therefore, Eliza and Noel dive underwater for a little hunting practice, where the Ice Queen eventually catches one that is unfortunately not suitable for eating. Seeing the pitiful look on Noel's face, Eliza gets her revenge by making fun of her, but Abel, on the other hand, is still focusing on the lessons. Thus, he once again goes into his full hunting mode and freezes a whole group of seafood into his icebox magic, before sending it to the surface to set an example for the two. Moreover, the amber-eyed mage compresses the substance into a tiny cube to lighten the load when carrying it, while assuring the girls that it's also possible for them when they try enough. Except it really isn't, because they don't possess the absurd power this dense former hero has. When night arrives, so are the mouth-watering meals that excite the gluttons, specifically Eliza, as they are able to let the store cook their food without paying money, thanks to Abel giving the excess fish he has caught. Fortunately, Ted is smiling from the deliciousness of the free dinner, but his expression darkens upon reminiscing his hellish alone time full of studying the whole day. But while they are chit-chatting about their next plans for the tour, Lilith and Abel notice an ominous presence lurking around, but decide to delay their suspicion as devouring the scrumptious foods comes first. A few minutes later, the boys are already in their room, so Ted invites his mentor to do fun things, as they are in the middle of the training camp after all. Unfortunately, the Grand Magician mercilessly refuses his invitations to play, so the pitiful boy throws a tantrum to beg the former hero. Tired of his whining, Abel finally agrees to do something fun, so Ted starts the pillow fight by playfully throwing the cushions to the Grand Magician, unaware that Abel is treating it seriously as he enchants the pillow with a substance enlargement before using it to crush Ted, who can only surrender to their short duel. As a result, the apprentice has no choice but to sleep, which becomes the opportunity for Abel to silently sneak out of the room. The Grand Magician silently heads outside on a secret mission, or perhaps a hidden rendezvous with the demon princess, as Lilith is already in the location where he's headed. However, Abel is also surprised after seeing Lilith in the area, especially because this demon princess is pretending she's just in for a moon viewing. Abel knows it isn't the case, and he points out the change that is very much evident when looking at Lilith. Finally, the Grand Magician asks why she's guarding the students against the threat that they have noticed earlier, which is out of her character as someone who is only forced to coexist with humans due to her situation. In response, Lilith tells her master that she's doing this as her duty as a teacher, leading Abel to urge the princess to rest in her room and leave the remaining job to him. The Grand Magician assures Lilith that he will be okay before rushing to the location of their enemy and leaves Lilith. Eventually, Abel notices that he is getting closer to where the threat is, causing him to stop now that the shadow of the enemy, Nabil, shows himself and reveals that they are currently in his spider's nest. His face is the one who catches Abel's attention, though, because this Grand Magician has the gall to insult the burn marks that he himself caused, adding insults to injury. Literally. Of course, the arachnid demon gets enraged by the boy's words, so he slowly transforms into his original form and turns into a demonic black spider, which Abel merely watches instead of striking first. As a result, Nabil lets out a sinister laugh and dashes around the former hero at a speed that even the Grand Magician acknowledges. Fortunately, Abel can still evade the attacks despite not being able to see Nabil due to his quickness, but the spider demon still has tricks up his sleeve as he changes his movement's trajectory to land a hit that is also unsuccessful in the end. However, Nabil is not finished yet, and he continues to increase his swiftness to corner the Grand Magician, forcing Abel to admit that his enemy's speed and strength are rare, even in his past timeline. In answer, the magician stops moving and closes his eyes, which just gives the arachnid an opportunity to execute the finishing blow. Abel's flames stop him in his tracks though, but this lucky demon escapes getting incinerated in a hair's breadth by the Grand Magician who's originally planning to completely burn the man's face. Consequently, Nabil is thrown into confusion as to how Abel is keeping up with his speed, so the Grand Magician reveals he's following the demon's magic trajectory instead of his physical form. After hearing that, Nabil gains suspicions that the mage in front of him is really someone from their current era, thinking that Abel is on a par with the disciple of the great four heroes. Little did he know that it was the last thing he should have said to this unsung Grand Magician, so Nabil continued his plan to eliminate the boy in fear he might ruin their plans, this time with his tiny underlings scattering around. Moreover, this arachnid demon is getting more confident of his victory, unaware that Abel has realized that this numbers advantage is his plan all along. Therefore, Nabil commences the signal for his troops to execute the attack, so they shoot magic-strengthened webs to shred the Grand Magician's body into pieces. Unfortunately for them, Abel has a countermeasure as he summons a tempest to send those life-ending webs away, eventually bringing it straight at the demon who can only scream in pain while enduring those wind blades. Despite the tremendous damage, Nabil still manages to stand up and face the magician whose amber-colored eyes ring a bell for this over 100-year-old demon. Finally, Nabil learns that his opponent is the legendary Grand Magician himself, the man dubbed the Golden Black Cat. The nostalgic nickname brings back memories of Abel, who gained that title in his days of continuous battles. But even though the revelation of his identity takes Nabil aback, this demon still has the gall to escape and exact his revenge some other time. As the ravens aid the flight of their master, Nabil has a strange smile of victory despite his humiliating defeat, confident he can avenge himself someday. However, Abel will not let him have his way as everything is just as he anticipated, and all according to the plan of the former hero. A large magic circle appears, followed by the Grand Magician's chant and the appearance of an enormous dragon that quickly devours the helpless spider, burning his complete existence amidst the moonlight that is very much this loser's nickname. Watching the loud boom in the sky, Abel is quite surprised that someone can still put up a good fight against him. A few days later, the training camp finally ends now that they have fully enjoyed their short trip, except for the failed student who's moved into tears for not having the time to soak himself in the beach. Unfortunately, this whole thing becomes an endless study session for Ted, so Eliza gives him a helping hand by mentioning the upcoming school trip in September. But while Ted is returning to himself, Noel sees the shocking news in the newspaper showing the incident in Nabil's secret hideout. Eliza and Ted are intrigued by the report where the latter remembers seeing a flame dragon outside on the first night of their trip. As a result, the secret perpetrator of those events reminds himself to be careful the next time around, but the Ice Queen already has suspicions that Abel is greatly related to those incidents. Unfortunately, the arrival of the magic train allows the Grand Magician not to directly answer Noel's question, and he'd straight to enter the transportation. However, the amber-eyed mage still needs to review his actions, and their fast, long ride seems to be the perfect place for it. After a long time, the two finally return to their hometown to continue the rest of their long summer break. Entering the house, Abel notices that it is strangely clean despite no one staying in the place, and finds out that the influential demon princess asked Evans, Ted's father's residence, to manage it while they are far away. Thanks to that, Abel returns to his good old office and does some studying until Lilith barges in, leading him to reveal that he's doing the report for their research group, which includes their findings about the great four heroes who accidentally stole all his achievements. Lilith looks worried as she asks her master if he harbors resentment to his former companions who drove him out of their party. However, the Grand Magician doesn't even have a wee bit of hatred, because Roy even recommends a place for him to live in peace before the elimination of amber-eyed humans starts. Moreover, he knows they are not evil people as Roy is their well-known caring party leader, while Maria, on the other hand, is a woman with a strong sense of justice. In addition, Daytona is a popular merchant's daughter who is very helpful to them, and Kane, the hero of Ash, is someone who doesn't care much about worldly things. However, a sudden realization enters Abel's mind, and he wonders why Kane doesn't have a famous legacy in this era compared to other heroes. The demon princess notices the Grand Mage spacing out, but Abel doesn't bother to explain his thoughts and just mentions a girl from the past named Ayani, who obviously disturbs the peace of mind of the jealous demon. Afterward, Abel reveals the girl's identity as his junior at a certain magic association, Chaos Raid, who is a great black-eyed magician. If only she's not saying silly things that hint at her evident love and masochism for the Grand Mage. Of course, Abel has no idea of Ayani's true motives back then, but the opposite can be seen in Lilith, whose jealousy skyrockets. Eventually, the Grand Magician notices it and teases the demon princess by saying that he only focuses on becoming stronger in the past, hinting it's not the same this time. Lilith blushes when she hears that, while anticipating some romantic words from the former hero's mouth, only to hear that it's the technology and cultural development that he is focusing on right now. There is no wholesome lover's moment for the demon princess, but she still feels glad that Abel has no hard feelings after knowing the stolen achievements in St. Rhea. However, the Grand Magician is equally concerned about her, who was near to being eliminated in the past at the hands of his own companions. Therefore, Abel thanks Lilith for worrying about him, which makes the red-faced demon lady drool in celebration that her master is genuinely expressing his gratitude. Her reaction is downright exaggerated, but that is no reason for Abel not to say his thanks once more. Although that's not what this in-heat demon wants right now, as she hugs the Grand Magician and invites him to an afternoon bath tour. An unknown number of days have passed, but the summer vacation is nearing its end, or it already is, now that Lilith informs Abel about the carriage she has prepared, and the excited little Ted who is waiting in excitement. Unfortunately, the young noble still has to wait for a few more minutes because Lilith notices her master's increase in height, so Abel decides to make a short comparison first. The two lean their backs on each other, and the floating book becomes their judge, which reveals that Abel has certainly grown taller, even though that still won't suffice to beat the competitive Lilith. No more beating around the bush, though, as the impatient Ted can't maintain his non-existent patience anymore and urges his mentor to quickly make their way to the carriage. Leaving the house, Abel can't help but point out the over-eagerness of his student to go back to the academy, but Ted is not hiding his smile in the first place, as there is one more reason to return besides meeting his friends. Suddenly, he explodes a single branch to present his current powers due to his summer break training, planning to show this off to everyone eventually. After that, Ted wonders if his teacher has an ounce of enthusiasm to return to the academy, and that causes Abel to remember the boring lessons and troublesome teachers and students he has encountered along the way. However, the current feelings of the Grand Magician are blended with anticipation to reunite with his acquaintances, after all, leading him to tell Ted that he is slightly excited about classes. The boy's elation has no sign of ending, though, and now stars are forming in his eyes as he mentions the upcoming school trip, which his mentor has zero idea what. In spite of his surprise that the biggest school event is an unknown existence for Abel, Ted declares his unwavering determination to enjoy that most awaited tour. As their playful chattering continues, the group eventually enters the academy, officially ending their long summer break. Meanwhile, in Emerson's office, we can see the genius teacher troubled about the piled-up newspapers gathered in his room. Suddenly, he spots the report of a flame dragon sighting in St. Rhea, which leads him to regret not being able to come with the research group as he immediately knows that Abel is the culprit of the incident. However, Emerson focuses his attention on a letter from the Kronos Magic Association instead, and reads its shocking contents that lead him to, once again, be a madman, just by thinking about his desire to win against Abel in their next and nearing battle. To replace the busy Emerson, Betty agrees the class on the first day of their new semester, and orders them to discard their vacation mode as she will thoroughly teach them again. Abel notices the physical improvement of their gym-loving teacher, and is pretty impressed by it, but the attitude of his unmotivated classmates is definitely one hell of a displeasure for the Grand Mage. However, their lack of excitement is within Fedia's expectations, and she has a plan to deal with it by giving them their career survey papers. She urges the class to write down their goals, but Abel's dream is not suited to Jodan because the only thing he wants is to live a peaceful life. After all, it is Lilith who teases Abel in the past, which forces him into attending the academy, so it is a troublesome era for the Grand Magician right now, unlike his classmates. There's nothing much to do about it right now, though, so Abel goes to the secret library, where Noel hurriedly welcomes him like an excited pup. Moreover, the Ice Queen shows Abel her large collection of 100-year-old books, and reveals that she got it thanks to her father, who has a good relationship with a particular bookstore. That information reminds the former hero of the merchant lineage of this young girl, who is still hell-bent on learning those old books as someone who aims to be an ancient magic researcher. Eventually, Ted arrives just to brag about the limited deluxe strawberry parfait sandwich to the two, but his arrival is excellent timing for Abel to ask what his dream is. To his surprise, this noble boy reveals wanting to be the feudal lord of their territory, and this is the first time the amber-eyed mage heard it, so he's quite worried if his apprentice can perform the role well someday. However, it is Ted's parents' decision, as there's no way his infamous older brother can take over the position. Unfortunately, another glutton with the same food as Ted joins the conversation. but there's nothing to do. So Abel asks the same question he says to his apprentice. As a result, Eliza declares her wish to be employed in the Kronos Magic Association, leading Abel to think it may be a good fit for Eliza, knowing it's filled with strong magicians like Musin, whom he fought in the past. On the contrary, Ted thinks it is too risky, as it is a high-risk, high-reward career where the risk involves having your grave as early as 20. The noble boy's opinion sways toward becoming a royal knight, rather than getting crushed like his strawberry parfait sandwich, but Eliza will not give in to safety for this dream of hers. Finally, someone asks what Abel's goal is, but it seems like the Grand Magician won't have any opportunity to answer, thanks to the eavesdropping teacher secretly listening to their conversation. Emerson reveals himself with a smile, but Noel is displeased seeing their own club advisor entering their secret library. Even so, the genius teacher proceeds on his original goal and asks Abel's dream career before revealing his offer for him to take Kronos' final open seat. Eliza is in disbelief about the absurd turn of events, so Emerson informs them that there's nothing strange in it, as most members of their association are scouted the same way, like what he is doing with this amber-eyed prodigy. That same talent he wants to recruit isn't the slightest interested, though, so Emerson decides to give him a business card for the time being, inviting Abel to have a tour with his friends. As soon as he leaves, the ladies fawn over the business card and seem excited to go with the Grand Mage, so Abel decides to just take the tour without Ted, who's scared of Emerson. Good grief. In casual clothes, the three arrive at the famous Kronos headquarters, where the entrance is too inconspicuous for not-so-magically talented Eliza. Consequently, it's a great surprise for her to see Abel casually walking through the wall, and later find out that it's a visual misperception magic that is simply the building's security. In a hall leading to different rooms, the receptionist, who is a magic doll, greets the group at what she calls the mechanical clock tower. Abel shows the business card, which immediately gets scanned by the receptionist, who eventually leads them to door number 7. Therefore, the trio enters another hall that is too future-oriented, to the point that robots become the working force rather than humans. Fortunately, they finally see a living being that is the most reasonable to stumble into, as Emerson shows up and urges them to watch the futuristic labor force consisting of nothing but robots mass-producing regalia themselves. The professor is so amused that he has a sinister smile, but Abel has a strange, dark expression, realizing that is what humans resort to due to him stopping human transmutation experiments in the past. Surprisingly, Eliza is well-versed in what kind of regalia Kronos is making, so Emerson asks her if she's interested in joining their association. Although it's not, a red-eyed lady reveals that it is her childhood dream, so the prodigy teacher creepily checks the girl's body only to tell her that she's an inferior trash compared to Abel, but a superior garbage than the nobodies in the academy. Thus, the Grand Magician concludes that their teacher is awful at communicating because he probably thinks that his words earlier are compliments. Abel also tells him that he hates regalia as it hinders a magician from thinking, and Emerson agrees with him on this one, informing Abel that these weapons are mere business products to provide for the needs of the majority of humans. With that said, Emerson offers his made-to-order products, so Abel bluntly refuses as he has no need of any flimsy regalia, allowing them to proceed on their tour's next destination, after the Grand Magician secretly enchants something to an employee. Eventually, they reach a sterile room where Emerson urges the two ladies to cleanse their bodies first, while he and Abel head first and wait for them inside. As soon as entering, however, Abel notices that the germ-free pretense is pure nonsense by this prodigy professor, who leads him to a wide hall where a bunch of wannabe Grim Reapers are waiting to deliver this amber-eyed magician to the graveyard where he belongs. Furthermore, Emerson introduces the dark side of their association as secret assassins who will eliminate anybody at the government's request.
His smug expression is simply amusing, though, because the former hero knows that magic associations are basically groups of mercenaries since 200 years ago. Unaware of the Grand Mage's thoughts, Emerson informs Abel that they are currently in the Judgment Hall, where the wannabe Grim Reapers are actually elites who will give Abel an entrance examination. After that, he catches Abel's interest by showing a short sword believed to be from their organization's founder himself, the Judgment Blade. However, the sword's real alias, Nameless, turns out to be Abel's weapon in the past that got lost when he left his former magic association. Of course, Emerson is clueless about its history, leading him to reveal that only the blade's original owner can hold it while challenging Abel to defeat anyone among the elites, so he can become one of them and unravel the sword's mystery. Abel's decision not to join Emerson's organization is still not changing, but seeing Nameless again moves the emotion of the former hero. To everyone's surprise, Abel grabs the blade and successfully pulls it out, leaving them all puzzled, including Emerson, as they wonder who the boy before them really is. Little did they know that it was the cringe-worthy nickname of his nameless sword that gave Abel the motivation to fight not one, but all of them. Abel's taunt successfully provokes Chrono's elites, who immediately group up to punish the Grand Magician, which turns out to be a mere afterimage of the real body. Accelerating at a tremendous speed, Abel evades their attacks and counters them with his own finishing blows that easily defeat the first-class personnel of the association. It reaches the point where Abel immerses himself in his own thoughts while fighting, and concludes that Chronos is based on Chaos Raid, the one that Abel is a former member of. In addition, the skills of the current elite mages are downright inferior to the Amber-Eyed Mage, who is easily evading their low-standard powerful spells while playing around with his offensive without taking the lives of these small fries. Unfortunately, the one-sided stomp takes Abel down memory lane to the times when he was still a part of the infamous Chaos Raid. A lingering regret surfaces as the story reveals that it is Abel who brings Cain to the path of violence before he leaves the organization and joins Roy's party before reuniting with Cain again, who eventually becomes the hero of Ash. At the same time, when the reminiscing ends, Abel realizes that the enemies have been taken down, and those remaining have no intention of falling into the hands of the Amber-Eyed Mage. Suddenly, a man barges in with a loud clapping to praise the strength of the young-looking talent, and introduces himself as the vice captain of Chronos Magic Association, Aaron. Abel notices the number 2 in Roman numerals mark on the vice captain's arm, but the man's dialogue continues as he is impressed by Abel wielding the Judgment Blade and his battle prowess. Thus, he invites the Grand Magician to join the Chronos executive known as the Numbers, but Abel sees no need to join, so he blatantly refuses him. Aaron takes it the wrong way, however, and sulks as he warns the Amber-Eyed Mage that saying no is not an option. Butting into the conversation, Emerson warns Abel that it's not wise to refuse because their organization is way too big to oppose. Of course, the arrogance of these clueless kids is laughable for the former hero, so he once again rejects their proposal and casts an enchantment to decrease the endurance of the nameless blade. Aaron is too dumb to understand that Abel has no intention to be their ally, so he warns the Amber-Eyed Mage once more only to witness the destruction of the cursed legendary sword that they cherish so much. Though watching the reaction of the arrogant vice captain is unbearable, Abel is preoccupied with saying goodbye to his former partner as his responsibility to dispose of it as the original owner. Although Emerson is just laughing at this unprecedented event, the opposite can be seen in the vice captain who finally snaps in rage to punish the sword destroyer. He receives a scolding from the former hero, though, who tells them that letting the blade rust is definitely not the way to take care of the cursed weapon. The good old Aaron seems to hate being scolded, however, as he responds by ordering Emerson to push a particular button, gathering most of the factory robots in the Judgment Hall and surrounding the Grand Magician. Once again, overconfidence envelops the prodigy professor as he declares the approaching elimination, but Abel is not a wee bit threatened by their childish threats and just calls his reinforcements. Still, Emerson is not frightened, knowing that the door is magically locked to prevent Noel from coming. Thus, the loud rumblings take the two by surprise, but it will escalate even more when the remaining robots barge in with weapons in their hands to take down their fellow non-human employees. As a result, Emerson and Aaron excuse themselves from the battle to watch on the sidelines, wondering what the hell has happened for their robots to act like that. However, the prodigy professor immediately notices that Abel has cracked the program of their machines to turn the tides in his favor. Turns out, the Grand Magician is one step ahead and rewrote the system of the robot earlier, as he already expects the worst. Abel freely orders the machines to attack the Chronos elites, and leaves them with no other option but to destroy those robots. However, the vice captain stops the wannabe Reapers from doing that as it may result in a financial loss for their organization, giving another disappointing display for the former hero who decides to just leave while they're still preoccupied. Outside the room, Abel sees Eliza and Noel waiting for the signal to enter, so he carries both of them in his arms to drag them along for their escape. The two young maidens are taken by surprise by Abel's sudden actions, but the Grand Magician can't afford to explain the whole story as of this moment, so he compares the weight of the girls in his arms instead. Unfortunately, Eliza possesses the inborn Esper skills of most teenage girls, so she senses Abel's rude thoughts. But Noel, on the other hand, perceives that something good happened for the Grand Magician, and that he has a brighter look on his expressionless face, unlike usual. Eventually, Abel realizes that their observation is right now, that a load has been taken off his shoulder after properly bidding farewell to his nameless sword. Unfortunately for the defeated teacher, His unannounced challenge once again benefits the Grand Magician. Night arrives and Abel informs Lilith about the whole incident in Kronos and apologizes to her for making the situation bigger simply because of the sword. Fortunately, the demon princess thinks her master's actions are for the better because the infamous Judgment Blade has taken so many lives because of its curse. Therefore, Abel feels the need to prevent conflicts like this from worsening, especially because the cause of it is his relics, like what happened with Akashic records. Moreover, the underlying problem surfaces due to an inevitable confrontation against the Kronos Magic Association in the upcoming school trip, where they will most likely strike as it will be held overseas, so no holds barred for the mercenaries. Abel still thinks it'll not be a problem for him, so Lilith shows the hidden motives of her excessive worries, which is to stay by the Grand Magician's side at all times during the educational tour. Seems like the demon princess is becoming more cunning and, at the same time, bold in showing her love to Abel, and this pubescent-looking boy can't do or won't do much about it. Meanwhile, in the mechanical clock, the tower approaches a familiar figure who immediately heads straight to the receptionist and receives his Roman numeral number 5 from the magic doll. After a long time, the Bardo of the Gale appears once again. This time, he heads to the association's midnight meeting. Bardo immediately heads to the room and hears his colleagues' heated yells before he can even enter it. The shouts themselves are not a surprise for him, but the words from the Roman numeral 9, the girl who will be called Canaria, shock him to the core after hearing that the Judgment Blade has been destroyed. Finally, Bardo enters the meeting room where the higher-ups, mainly the executives known as the Numbers, are gathering. Specifically, because he is late, Emerson greets Bardo before informing him that their problems regarding Abel are finally coming to the surface. Mousson cuts into their conversation and reminisces about her unpleasant memories with Bardo during their utter humiliating defeat against the Grand Mage. And the meeting continues with Aaron summarizing the events before asking the opinions of their captain, whom we will call Rio. However, the mysterious girl is more curious about the censored appearance of the amber-eyed sword destroyer in the whole footage of the battle, so she asks first why it is that way. Thus, the genius professor explains that Abel temporarily takes over their surveillance system in the short amount of time he has. But Emerson still feels a tad bit of admiration for the Grand Magician's skills, leading Aaron to scold the hell out of him for looking so happy while talking to their captain. In response, the haughty prodigy reminds the vice captain that scolding and blaming him for their defeat is truly pointless, as he is the best magical engineer they can rely on. Aaron seems to be having the most stressful night of his life, because Rio is just staring blankly at the recorded video. After watching it for a few more minutes, the Kronos captain finally issues her orders to take custody of Abel at all costs. The story then brings us to the classroom where Phedia announces the start of their preparations for the school trip, making everyone excited while wondering where this year's most awaited event will be held. Unfortunately, it is a disappointment for them when Phedia declares they will go to the eastern island of Amatsushi, which, according to the former hero, is an unprosperous place 200 years ago. However, the muscle brain teacher is confident they can learn in that now reputable country, so she urges them to form their group of 4. Ted and Abel assemble theirs almost instantly, so they are left with 2 slots of girls that Eliza definitely wants to fill up with Yukari, so she's finally making her move. But before Abel can accept it, a female student intervenes along with another one and fights over the Grand Magician who's now too popular. He doesn't even know who those girls are. Furthermore, a bunch of spoiled nobles invite Eliza to join them instead of the inferior amber-eyed mage, but his efforts are so forced that Abel needs to intervene. Obviously, the 2 embodiments of idiocy prove that they are ignorant nobles, and Abel is not pleased by it anymore, so he scares his classmates with a single glare, reminding them that Eliza is already taken. Afterward, he submits the name of their group to Phedia, and casually passes by the noble boys who think Abel has cast weird magic on them. Only Phedia knows that the Grand Mage shows a simple glare full of malicious intent, but her mind strays from the right path again as she imagines Abel declaring that she is taken romantically by him. While Phedia is turning into a lost cause, the Grand Magician returns to his seat and feels relieved that his friends are in the same group. so he can protect them due to Lilith's hunch that Kronos will strike back on the school trip. His oblivious apprentice is still energetic as always, though, but perhaps it's for the better that the four of them can peacefully enjoy the educational tour. Unfortunately, the Kronos captain is still up to no good after knowing that their target will be at Amatsushi. After skipping a few uneventful days, the group departs via a magical train on their school trip journey. A playful argument occurs inside, though, as the two gluttons are arguing about the cookies Yukari brings. But the Grand Magician isn't joining them as he is always on guard for upcoming attacks, keeping in mind the reminder of the demon princess. Eventually, he butts in when Ted wonders if Noel comes on the trip and reveals that the cute little puppy is too nervous to spend time with strangers, and thus needs a treat in the form of a souvenir when they return. In the middle of their frivolous talk, the group catches sight of numerous airships, which turn out to be their next destination, as it will bring them straight to Amatsushi. As usual, Abel is more interested in the blimp's magical structure, but he's still excited compared to Ted, who is getting scared from worries if the airship could fly and carry them. It is unclear if the Grand Magician is concerned about his apprentice, because he's informing him about crash and accident rates or whatever, but still refuses to let him escape and drags him along to their seat in the magically powered blimp. Fortunately, Ted returns to his usual cheerful self when they arrive at Amatsushi, where their teachers eventually orient them before letting the students enjoy their first free time on the island. Abel and Lilith have their own world, however, and they are using eye contact to remind each other to be careful, as the demon princess can't just roam around and be with the Grand Mage, unfortunately for her. Afterward, Ted and the others head to the historic city of Hananomiya and enjoy the sightseeing while wandering around. However, Abel notices a peeping Tom watching from afar, and his group mates are unaware of it as they are discussing the local clothes that are very similar to one Yukari has. A few moments later, they reach a small bridge and see the famous brocaded carp swimming in the small pond. Yukari is fascinated by their appearance, but the two gluttons have bright eyes looking at the food instead, so she warns them that it's for fish. But it seems like Ted doesn't have a millimeter of care and straight up eats it. Abel is interested in having one too, but that's just his effort to hide that he knows the location of the enemy. That mercenary is irritated at the fact that he, Kronos number 12, known as the Ghost Water Dragon, Bruno, is doing all of this to finish off a mere kid. Eventually, Bruno remembers Bardo advising him to give everything he has so as not to fail the job. But this Ghost Water Dragon treats his advice as nothing and continues to recklessly form a water prison. Therefore, Bruno meets the Grand Mage's malicious intent, which stops him from moving, unaware that he basically gives off his location due to casting a spell. Still, Bruno is aware of his chances, so he waits for the opportunity, but as if Abel will hand him one when all he can give is fish food straight to his bamboo stalk ventilation. The free meal prevents the mercenary from breathing, but a totally unrelated topic is being discussed on the surface, which causes Ted and Eliza to throw their food to the carps, adding up to the suffering of a number from Kronos. Not long after, the group leaves the bridge and Abel follows them after a short while, hoping that the mercenaries will give up after this humiliating defeat. After all, it seems to be too much for the Ghost Water Dragon. Nevertheless, Abel's group goes on with their town exploration, where they go to an outdoor restaurant to fill their roaring tummies and mental appetites. Unfortunately, it is not too enjoyable for the Grand Mage, who notices that there is another peeping Tom observing them from a building in the distance. True enough, Canaria, who is also known as the Hawkeye, is watching them from afar with her infamous bow, eyeing the back of her elimination target. Therefore, Canaria casts speed enhancement at her weapon, while Musen's words, reminding the girl to prioritize her safety in the mission, surface, but is still taken with a grain of salt by this Hawkeye. Without further ado, Canaria shoots the enchanted arrow all the way from the tall building up to the Grand Magician, but Abel catches it using a chopstick. Hawkeye immediately changes her location so as not to be spotted, while Ted, on the other hand, is just amazed at the cool-looking arrow and thinks that his mentor bought it as a souvenir somewhere. In contrast, the two ladies are too busy to even notice what's really happening, similar to Ted, although he's more focused on the arrow's quality. As a result, Abel is free to determine the opponent's strength and learns, thanks to the enchantment, that she is just an average fighter. Those thoughts are stopped by Ted, however, who wants to trade the badass arrow to his dragon sword keyholder. To the boys' disappointment, Abel refuses to get the highly popular keyholder and informs them of his 5-minute leave, which Ted assumes is a toilet break and proudly informs Eliza about it. Meanwhile, Canaria leaps onto the gigantic trees and makes it to her new position for the incoming second attempt. Using her magically enhanced vision, Hawkeye looks at the restaurant again and finds out that Abel is not there anymore. She desperately looks for her elimination target everywhere within her sight, but the Grand Magician is the one who finds Canaria this time, and Peekaboo's the Kronos Archer. Regardless, the girl doesn't let the shock get the best of her and shoots the arrow of devastation at the amber-eyed mage, but still fails to devastate the target, who catches it barehanded this time around. Abel is disappointed at the prowess of one of the Kronos executives. Thus, he volunteers to show her how it is done by bringing back the 2 missed arrows to their original owners. Barely, though deliberately, the 2 fail to hit Canaria, but are successful in crushing the girl's will to fight. So he returns to the group and tells Ted that there's no arrow for him anymore. Finally, the first day ends, and all that's left for these students is to enjoy the cuisine of the Eastern country. Moreover, the Grand Magician now feels relieved that the mercenaries who are after his life are not somebody to be worried about. So he, along with Ted and his other classmates, are now helping themselves with the cuisine of Amatsushi. Surprisingly, the former hero treats those seafood as delish and even wants to know its name upon returning to the capital. On the contrary, Cantor doesn't feel enjoyment and is irritated while reminding the students that illicit relationships are a large no-no in this training camp. Afterward, Abel hears his classmates gossiping about the sins of the seniors last year, which makes the rules between boys and girls more strict. The male students can't stop begging for the teacher's permission, though, but Cantor is hell-bent on not permitting them, definitely not because of the fear that these boys will reach enlightenment on this trip. Meanwhile, in the West Building's public bath, we can see Eliza and Yukari talking about Amatsuchi's cuisine, which is very much to their liking. Out of the blue, Yukari asks her maiden-in-love friend if she's going to visit her amber-eyed crush after bathing. She also informs Eliza about students who started dating thanks to the school trip, but the red-eyed prodigy refrains about sneaking in the boys' room this time, especially when she remembers doing it in the past and sees Lilith and Abel kissing. Therefore, Eliza forces herself to believe it's just a siblings thing, and decides not to confess her love, thinking she'll just be rejected in the end. Yukari notices her worries, though, and invites Eliza to have a love talk in her room to lighten some burden from Eliza's mind. In spite of the wholesome talk on the girls' side, the opposite seems to be happening on the dark side of the spectrum where the teenage boys are. Unfortunately, Abel can't sleep with their inconsiderate romance talks echoing, and the fact that his beloved apprentice isn't with him today. Eventually, these pubescent boys mention Eliza and Yukari in their discussion, and discuss how cute these waifus are, and Abel is just listening, intrigued by the conversation that is new to his ears. However, one of these young boys, whom we will call Zyle, cannot stop his curiosity anymore, and urges his 2 friends to go even further and go to the girls' rooms. Abel feels disappointed at these kids for planning to take the risk, and thinks that their upcoming punishment won't be light considering the heaviness of their crime. But Zyle's sudden invitation takes him by surprise, and those thoughts run away. The boys' friends are against the idea, though, and the former hero is obviously not pleased that someone of his stature is being invited to take part in their plan. Without an inch of hesitation, Abel refuses their invitation. But Zyle has already predicted those words, so he urges the Grand Magician to be cooperative this time, as if saying that sneaking into the girls' rooms will definitely make him exactly that. Now, there's no choice for the Grand Magician but to join the exploration of the innocent, curious boys for the sake of being cooperative, leading Zyle to act chummy as he introduces himself to the amber-eyed mage. The feeling of not being discriminated against by his classmates is still new for Abel, and Zyle's friends are powerless to prevent him from accompanying them. Furthermore, there's no stopping these young pervs anymore as they depart on their high-risk, high-reward journey. Amidst the deep night, the Grand Magician, along with the puberty boys, is having the most nerve-wracking moment of their lives. Fortunately, Abel is getting serious as he analyzes the positions and shifts of each lookout teacher, but still arrives at the conclusion that it will be hard for them to sneak out with all of the instructors roaming around. The bitterness gets into these adventurous students that they resort to talking garbage about Contour and Phedia and call them jealous for not permitting their grand desire. Worse, Abel's mind might deteriorate from thinking that he can learn something by observing his new partners in crime. Sneakily, the group heads downstairs, where Zeal suddenly asks Abel if he currently has a girlfriend. The Grand Magician is so taken aback by the abrupt question that he gets confused as to what the hell his classmate is talking about. Even so, the former hero thinks carefully of his answer, so Lilith comes to his mind. But it turns out that he's not treating that demon princess as a lover, but rather a mere partner who shares the same goals as him. Suddenly, persons from his past surface in Abel's mind as they are greatly connected to the reason why Abel isn't committed to loving Lilith. Zyle notices their amber-eyed classmates spacing out, forcing Abel to return to reality and telling them he does not have a girlfriend, but has someone who is close to being one. From delight by assuming that Abel is their ally, Zyle and the gang cry in jealousy after hearing the Grand Magician's revelation and bombard him with questions about the girl he is talking about. Of course, Abel doesn't inform them about Lilith and just tells them that his close-to-a-lover woman isn't a student from their academy. Putting that aside, Zyle and the group arrive where Phedia and Cantor are and overhear their conversation, where the latter is warning the former that the boys are definitely up to something hideous. The puberty boys are mad about the betrayal of their PE instructor, but Cantor knows nothing about that, and may not even care as he is focusing on his own plan to remind the female students to be careful of the boys. Immediately, Phedia stops her shameless colleague from proceeding further on his uncultured, unforgivable, perverted scheme. But she finally senses the presence of Zyle and his fellow puberty boys, and orders all of them to show themselves. Abel expects this to happen though, so he thinks of lending his companions a hand so they can run and hide. Therefore, the Grand Magician casts a magic spell that turns off the lights, immediately urging them to run to their room and abort their sneaky plan. It is too late when he realizes that his classmates have already fled the scene, but Abel eventually catches up and joins their advance toward the quote-unquote Garden of Maidens. At last, the former hero begins to regret helping the puberty boys. But there's literally no turning back now, as the envious Cantor sprints with all his might to catch the young versions of himself. To make it worse, Phedia is waiting for them on the other side, and is eager to punish the teenagers for going toward the path of their physical education instructor. As the situation gets hopeless for Zyle and his team, Abel forges a new way and urges them to follow his lead as he jumps through the window from the 3rd floor and cushions his fall with wind magic. However, it seems like these boys who are courageous enough to embark on a journey toward the Garden of Maidens are not brave enough to jump from the window like the former hero. Abel feels relieved that he escapes from the grasp of Cantor and Phedia. The demon princess reveals that she is tasked to guard the West Building while looking for the students who sneak out, but is quite surprised that her master is one of them. Therefore, Lilith teases the Grand Magician by letting him peek a bit if she's the reason for him going with Zyle. But her blushing onion face quickly turns into displeasure when she asks Abel if he's going to meet another girl instead. The Grand Magician is sneaky in his own way, and informs Lilith that he wants to meet her to talk about Kronos. But it seems like the devil knows somebody is speaking of him as Abel, and the demon princess notices Emerson's regalia spying on them. Thus, the two head inside and discuss their plans regarding the Kronos mercenaries. But the Grand Magician doesn't want needless violence right now, and tells Lilith to continue protecting the students, but refrain from disposing of the enemies for the time being. He starts going back to his room, but the demon princess wants them to do something similar to an illicit relationship that Cantor hates so much for students to have. However, Abel refuses it this time, and plans to go back to his room to receive the teacher's scolding instead. Lilith won't compromise though, and goes for a romantic kiss followed by an embrace. But her actions trigger Abel to contemplate Zyle's words earlier when he asks if this grand mage has a lover. Returning to reality, Abel pushes Lilith away to let go of the hug and walks toward his room while telling the demon princess to go back as well. His feelings of treating Lilith as close to a girlfriend still won't change, but it seems like the Grand Magician has a long way to go before he can finally move on from those he betrayed him in the past. Unfortunately, his inner apology won't reach Lilith, who is clearly devastated by what he did. When she goes outside, however, Phedia, who takes the sinful puberty boys along, asks her fellow teacher if she has seen Abel. Consequently, the gem-loving woman learns that the amber-eyed student is already in his room and orders Zyle to return as well, or they will have to submit 30 notes of apology and run the same number of laps with her. Obviously, these young boys don't want any of that, so Phedia just invites Lilith to head back to the building. However, the demon princess sees her master peeking in the window and waves at him with a smile, even though what happened earlier is absolutely crushing. Still, this demon princess is willing to wait for a romance to bloom like what she's been doing for over 200 years. Unbeknownst to the lover girl, Kronos is still spying on her and is watching the footage earlier, wherein she, Captain Rio, eventually focuses on Lilith alone and remembers that she has the same name as the Demon Lord's daughter. Meanwhile, we can see Eren in the Kronos headquarters munching a Japanese dumpling while looking at all the reports showing that their mercenaries have failed in their attempts to take down Abel. Eren is obviously displeased at the results, but a staff member interrupts his rage to give something that Bruno and Canaria want to hand to him. Unfortunately, it is not what he wants right now, as they turn out to be resignation letters from the two warriors whose spirits are clearly broken from their defeats. The vice captain can believe that sending Bruno and Canaria for the mission will turn out this way, but there's no point in mulling it over, so he thinks of their next plan, whether to continue or not. Out of nowhere, the voice of the captain echoes and tells Eren that there's no need to proceed further with the mission. That is strange, however, as Rio's figure is nowhere to be seen in the room until Eren's subordinate suddenly acts weird, and a hole opens in his guts where a woman who's hiding shows herself. Unlike watching horror films, the vice captain can't scream and shriek because the person who appears from the man's belly is the numbers captain herself. Cleansing her body with magic, Rio informs Eren that Abel is harmless, and by no means their enemy. However, the vice captain is not concerned by that right now, as all he is doing is wondering if the gut opener in front of him is the real enemy of humankind. In addition, Eren starts to question if Rio is a human in the first place, as there are records that this teenager-looking lady has been part of Kronos for decades. Eventually, the captain notices that Eren is too preoccupied, so she asks if there's something wrong, but as if the vice captain will risk voicing out his thoughts. Putting that aside, Rio returns to the main topic and shows Lilith's image on the laptop to Eren, who thinks she's just an ordinary teacher. Therefore, Rio reveals that the woman in the picture is a powerful demon they immediately need to eliminate. The next day, Abel is lucky enough to start the second day of the trip without harsh punishment, given what happened last night. On top of that, there are no Kronos peeping Toms this time around, so the group peacefully arrives in a famous archaic village. The culture and the artificial outfits are pleasing to the eyes of the Grand Magician, who shows a smile that is so rare you should take a screenshot of him. With his unusual happiness, Abel takes part in a photography session with the four of them. Yukari and Eliza grab their camera and plan to print the picture when they get home, but these two ladies have something in mind. Have the red-eyed girl take a picture with her crush. Ah, the pinnacle of youth. Therefore, Eliza invites the Grand Magician to a costume rental shop and excitedly leads the way after hearing the yes of the amber-eyed mage. But how peaceful it may seem, the former hero realizes it is good to be true, and his hunch might be correct after all, as strange creatures can be seen lurking around Lilith. Without further ado, the group arrives at the rental shop and browses through various traditional outfits to pick one and try. Abel has no intention of choosing clothes, though, until he remembers what happened with Zyle, specifically his efforts to become a cooperative person, and decides to pick one among the collection of outfits after all. A few minutes later, the receptionist is impressed by the ninja cosplay of the Grand Magician, and even compliments him for perfectly portraying a top-notch assassin, although Abel feels troubled being called like that. Shortly after, the ladies in Amatsushi outfits present themselves and are definitely slaying it to impress the boys. That only applies to the red-eyed prodigy, though, as she asks for the opinions of the Grand Mage, and surprisingly receives non-generic praise from Abel for the first time. Afterward, Yukari urges the two to prepare, as she will take pictures of them while Ted isn't finished changing yet. Furthermore, she gives a scenario where Abel is protecting the princess, and the Grand Magician turned ninja is raring to show off his acting and modeling skills, leading Yukari to go out of control while capturing endless photos of the two. Unfortunately, Ted arrives and interrupts her fun with his smug, top-notch hairstyle, but Yukari is displeased seeing his shogun style for sure. Still, Ted is confident that Abel will like his outfit, and he is absolutely right about that, except there's sarcasm hiding in his compliment. Putting all of that aside, the receptionist takes a picture for the group, and the tour continues as time passes. While on their way back and talking about how fun the day is, the Grand Magician notices the most awaited presence of the threat from a dozen enemies from Kronos. Abel wishes to fight them without the three around, though, and it seems like nature is helping him as the rain suddenly falls without any warning. Thanks to Abel's protection magic, the group doesn't turn into soaking chicks, and safely arrives at the bus stop that seems otherworldly for this world filled with carriages. However, when all of them have entered the transportation, Abel refuses to go and lies that he forgot something in the village. Now that the bus has left and there's no one beside him in the middle of the rain, Abel orders the enemy to come out. Thus, the muddy creatures show themselves and surround their elimination target, only to get destroyed in a mere instant. However, the humanoid monsters keep regenerating and striking back at the Grand Magician, forcing Abel to turn these sludges into hardened rocks before crumbling them into pieces. In spite of that, the regeneration still continues, so Abel focuses on finding the caster instead. The claps of the vice captain save him from trouble, though, as he finally shows himself with the small balls of stars floating on his palms to start the fight, and no more sending small fry subordinates. Without further ado, Aaron starts his revenge for Canaria and Bruno by gathering the 9 star balls, not to make a wish, but to obliterate the Grand Magician by sending them all toward him. Abel instantly realizes that the weapons he is dodging are one of the made-to-order regalias that Emerson is talking about. However, his evasion does not faze the vice captain in the slightest, as he reveals his ace in the hole by activating his ultimate skill of Heaven's Judgment, emitting a blinding light of X-shape, which eventually shoots the amber-eyed mage. Immediately, Abel forms a mud wall to prevent the mini-star balls from hitting him, but the sludge creature reappears and keeps Abel occupied and defending. As a result, Aaron manages to sneak behind his target using wind magic, which a green-eyed magician like him excels at. It complicates the situation, however, knowing that the muddy monsters aren't his doing, but someone else who must be a high-level black magician. Moreover, one more thing bothers Abel, as he wonders why Aaron is not emitting malicious intent, unlike the assassins he fought yesterday. Deflecting the star balls, Abel realizes that the Kronos vice captain is just stalling time, so he directly asks him his aim in their pointless clash. Instead of properly replying, Aaron answers it with another question, asking Abel who he really is and what's his goal for having immense powers. The Grand Magician doesn't like the vice captain's response and decides to hear it directly from the man's brain. This time, the dazzling shine comes from Abel, as his figure disappears from leaping to the blind spot of the enemy. However, that just makes him an easy target for Aaron, who successfully hits Abel with his regalia, which forces him to land on the ground thanks to the injury he receives. The vice captain is finally gaining the upper hand, so he continues to snowball his lead by shooting Abel with the star balls, freaking confident that the victory is within his grasp. All of a sudden, Aaron remembers Ryo telling him that the amber-eyed student is not their enemy. But of course, this vice captain who suffers a lot from his hands will not believe that woman's nonsense. Rage envelops him, and Aaron continues overwhelming Abel to emphasize their vast difference in strength, until one of the 9 balls hits the former hero in the head. Not wasting the opportunity, Aaron slashes Abel with countless wind blades while laughing like a madman until he finally takes the all-powerful legendary magician down. Unfortunately, all this shooting, casting, and laughing takes a toll on the vice captain's face as it turns sour while he's celebrating the victory. However, this is where all the farce ends as Aaron senses something in his back and turns to see that it is part of a magic cast by Abel. The vice captain can't help but feel shocked after finding out that there is a clone of his enemy, which turns out to be a mere illusion the Grand Mage activates. As kind as he is, Abel ends Aaron's sweet dreams before asking once again what his objective is. The vice captain refuses to say a word, so Abel helps him speak, one by summoning a magical sword and pierces it in the man's hand, making him scream. It doesn't end with that, and Abel is raring to make Aaron's legs a Japanese dumpling like the one he ate in the Kronos office. So the vice captain surrenders and reveals that he's simply buying time for their captain to lure Lilith. With that, Abel concludes that the Kronos captain might be the caster of the muddy monsters, and then tells Aaron that he trusts Lilith regardless of her race. The vice captain kneels in resignation after hearing that, but Abel is not so evil after all as he undoes the pierced sword as thanks for revealing the information. Still, learning that the weapon is just an illusion crushes Aaron's fighting spirit. Well deserved. The story returns its focus to Abel, who contemplates his words earlier about believing in Lilith. His thoughts trigger a flashback of the Grand Magician's life of betrayals, starting when he is driven away by his mother after she finds out that Abel has demonic amber eyes. Moreover, the woman reveals he is her deceased sister's child and calls Abel quote-unquote wretched monster. After wandering in the freezing cold for days, the amber-eyed boy meets a man we will refer to as Garius, who eventually becomes his magic teacher. However, his newfound father turns out to be a vicious orphanage founder who sacrifices the children for magical experiments. Abel retaliates to stop his plans, but Garius proves to be superior in strength until the young amber-eyed reveals his trump card. To Garius's shock, Abel's figure disappears, and his stomp earlier turns out to be a mere illusion, the imperfect magic the magic teacher is developing. Learning that his adopted son hides his powers from him, Garius spouts the same words as Abel's mother, monster. In the end, the amber-eyed boy ends his life and eventually joins Chaos Raid after meeting Maria and Daytona. But another betrayal occurs from a senior in the organization, and Abel parts with Nameless. As days pass, the Grand Magician meets Lilith in the Demon Lord's castle after they defeat her father. The girl's trembling figure reminds Abel of his past terrified and pitiful self, leading him to defend the demon princess from being executed, and he eventually goes on a journey to find a safe place for her. Upon returning to Roy, however, the banishment begins, which leads him to resort to reincarnation after 200 years and reunite with Lilith, who voluntarily waits for him. Finally, the backstory ends, and the former hero is finally sorting his feelings for Lilith to answer her unreciprocated love. However, it seems like Abel needs to hurry as the demon princess is already caught in trouble. Eventually, Lilith stops running after finding a fitting place to take on the enemy far from where the students are. The magic power and the rain seem to be bitter pills for the demon princess, however, as they bring out unpleasant memories in the demon castle where she's hiding in fear while her father is fighting the heroes. Unfortunately, one of those human saviors, the hero of Ash Kane, finds the girl and tells Lilith that he's her ally. Scared, the princess absolutely can't afford to believe the words of the notorious demon exterminator. Even now, Lilith can't handle thinking about it. But she doesn't have the luxury in the first place now that Rio finally arrives to face the demon princess she feels so disgusted at. Lilith asks about the objective of the Kronos captain, and finds out that it is really the elimination of her existence, which for Rio is corrupting Abel. She doesn't say it directly though, but Lilith senses it and stops Rio from interfering if it is their relationship she wants to mess with. However, the Kronos captain replies to her request with a freaking flying kick that Lilith fortunately evades as she immediately maintains her distance. Rio's next words surprise the teacher as she calls her the Demon Lord of Dusk's daughter, so Lilith warns her for the first and last time to run away if she really knows her true identity. Nevertheless, the captain dives head-on into the demon princess, only to get slapped by her hands, which are turning into a non-human form. Even with the smack's impact, Rio gets up like a marionette and talks like the damage of the attack is just slightly better than a mosquito bite. Lilith concludes that Rio, like her, is not a human, and the magic she emits is very similar to Cain. But because Lilith is distracted in her own thoughts, the muddy tentacles have made their way to commence a sneak attack and continue marking her as their target, despite being destroyed in their first attempt. In a span of mere seconds, the sludges catch the demon princess, and the laughing Rio is making it hard for Lilith to escape from the grasp of her pervy and unholy abilities. At last, the captain challenges the demon whom she calls the Witch of the Dusk to reveal her true form. Lilith knows it is the only way to turn the tides in her favor, but she refuses to do it, and instead asks Rio her true goal because she can just strangle her now if she wants. Fair enough, the demon princess has a point, so Rio declares her true desire to expose Lilith's true form and show it to her beloved Abel to show her him with despair once he sees it. Furthermore, the jealous captain of Kronos reminds Lilith that it is only her face and body that the Grand Mage wants, as he is incapable of loving someone. A flash of lightning befalls the forest, and at this rate, Rio will win her war of love against the demon princess. Eventually, the rainfall turns into a thunderstorm, while Abel is sprinting his way toward the location of the ominous magic power that even he, the former hero, didn't encounter 200 years ago. It doesn't take him too long to reach the destination where the Kronos captain is waiting along with Lilith, whose form turns into a black mist with a pair of horns. Literally, without anyone asking, Rio greets Abel with a long time no see and calls the amber-eyed mage senpai. Her words and the state Lilith is in enraging the hell out of Abel, causing him to tell Rio that he doesn't have a junior like her. But the captain of the Kronos' numbers changes her form and turns into a woman Abel is so familiar with. Thus, Ayane greets the senpai that she loves so much once again. There's still much more to uncover about how Ayane is still alive, but this is how this segment of the manga ends. If you like this story and want us to continue, please leave a comment down below with the name Abel.